Welcome, traveler. Set down your pack and rest a while. Tonight, we begin with the gods, the 9 quiet forces that shaped the world you walk through every time you step into Skyrim. Talos was not born a god. He was born a man. He walked, fought, bled, and led armies across Tamriel just like any mortal warrior would. But somewhere along the way, something changed. He unified the continent. He became Emperor Tiber Septim. And when he died, he did not simply fade away like most men do. He ascended, he joined the 8 divines and became the 9th. No other mortal in all of recorded history has ever done this. The other 8 were divine long before the mortal world existed. Talos earned his place after living an entire human life. That is why the Nords of Skyrim fight so hard to keep his name alive. To them, he is proof that a person born in the cold and dirt can reach something eternal. Long before Talos, long before Skyrim itself, there was a moment when the gods decided to build something. They gathered, these ancient divine beings, and debated whether to create a mortal world. Most of them hesitated. The cost was enormous. Creating a physical world would mean giving up parts of themselves forever. But Kinnereth said yes first. She was the first of the 8 to agree. Without that agreement, the others might never have followed. Nirn, the world beneath your feet in every Skyrim playthrough, would simply not exist. The forests, the mountains, the frozen rivers and stone cities, all of it traces back to one quiet moment when she stepped forward. She is often called the goddess of wind and nature, but she is also, in a deeper sense, the reason anything exists at all. Before Kinnereth agreed, before the debate even began, there was Akatosh. He is the god of time, and he was the very first divine being to take shape. The first to exist in any meaningful sense. The other divines formed around him, after him, because of him. Time had to exist before anything else could. Without Akatosh, there is no sequence, no past, no future, no story to tell. Every dragon in Skyrim carries a piece of his essence. Every moment you spend in that world moves because he allows it to. The sun rises over the throat of the world each morning because of something Akatosh set in motion before memory began. He does not speak. He does not interfere. He simply holds everything in place, quietly, the way a mountain holds the sky above it. Most players know Mara as the goddess of love. Her shrines sit in temples across Skyrim. Priests of Mara perform weddings. You buy amulets from them to propose to your companion. But that version of Mara is relatively recent. In the oldest Nordic and Atmaran traditions, the ones that existed before Skyrim was even settled, Mara was something else entirely. She was a warrior goddess. She was associated with the bonds between soldiers, the loyalty between people who fight side by side, the love that forms in hardship rather than comfort. Over centuries, as the culture softened, her image softened too. The warrior faded, the gentle mother remained. But the older texts still describe her with a spear, not flowers. That version of her never fully disappeared. It just grew quiet. Dibella is easy to misread. Her temples are decorated with beautiful things. Her priests speak of grace and beauty. In Markarth, her priestesses are elegant and calm, so most people assume she governs vanity, appearance, attraction, physical beauty, but that is only part of her domain. Dibella is also the patron of artists, of musicians, of craftspeople who spend years perfecting a single skill. Any person in Skyrim who dedicates themselves to making something beautiful, a song, a carving, a painted wall, does so under her quiet influence. A bard in a warm mead hall, playing the same tune he has played for 20 years until it sounds exactly right. That is Dibella's work too. She is not just about how things look. She is about the patience it takes to make something worth looking at. Zenithar rarely comes up in conversation. His shrines are easy to walk past. His priests do not preach loudly or chase you through the streets of Whiterun. He is simply there, the god of work, of trade, of honest effort put into honest labour. The merchants who set up their stalls every morning in Riften or Solitude, the blacksmiths who start their fires before dawn, the farmers who carry heavy loads through freezing mud, these are his people. He does not reward talent. He rewards patience and persistence. There is a quiet dignity in that. Outside, the wind moves through the mountains. The world keeps turning without applause. Zenithar is something like that. Steady, unhurried, easy to overlook, impossible to replace. Julianos is the divine that most Skyrim players barely notice. He governs magic, logic, scholarship, and lore. He should have a strong presence in a world full of mages and ancient texts. And yet his temples are almost nowhere to be found in Skyrim. The College of Winterhold does not fly his banner. The court wizards of the holds do not pray to him openly. His influence is real. Every spell cast, every riddle solved, every scholar bent over a candle-lit manuscript. But his formal worship is thin and scattered. Some lore suggests his following was always small. He appeals to thinkers, not crowds. Thinkers tend to pray quietly, in private, without ceremony. Perhaps that suits him just fine. Stendar started soft. In the oldest descriptions, he is the god of mercy, of compassion, of second chances given to those who needed them most. He is supposed to be gentle. But look at his followers in Skyrim, the vigilance of Stendar, and something has shifted. They march into ruins. They burn Daedric shrines. They hunt werewolves and vampires without hesitation. They are not cruel people. They believe in what they do. But mercy is not the first word that comes to mind when you watch them work. Somewhere between the old texts and the present day, Stendar's kindness curdled into something harder. His name is still spoken with reverence, but the softness behind it has been slowly replaced by purpose. That kind of change tends to happen quietly, over a very long time, until no one remembers what it looked like before. The 9 divines do not appear to mortals directly. They do not sit down beside you and explain themselves. They do not shout instructions from the clouds or send letters sealed with divine light. They work through other means, a dream that arrives at exactly the right moment, a sign carved into the bark of a tree, a champion chosen and guided without ever being told exactly why they were chosen. That distance is deliberate. It is part of how they operate. Their influence moves through the world like wind moves through an empty hall. You cannot see it, but you can feel where it has been. The temples, the shrines, the prayers offered up in cold stone rooms, all of these are mortals reaching upward into silence. And somehow, in ways that are hard to explain, the silence reaches back. The gods of Skyrim are not loud. They do not demand attention or fill the sky with signs. They shape things slowly, the way water shapes stone, over time, with patience, without asking to be noticed. Before you move on, let that sit with you for a moment. Every quiet corner of that world carries something older than the game itself. Rest now. There is much more still to come. Long before you picked up a sword in Helgen, dragons ruled everything. They were not beasts wandering a wild land. They were something much older and much harder to explain. Dragons are not animals. The lore makes this clear. They are pieces of Akatosh, the god of time, given physical shape and their own will. Akatosh is the first and oldest of the divines, and dragons carry fragments of his divine power inside them. That is why they are so difficult to destroy. That is why their language reshapes reality when spoken aloud. They are not creatures that evolved over centuries like wolves or bears. They were formed from something divine. Each dragon that circles the frozen peaks of Skyrim is, in a deep and quiet way, a small piece of a god wearing scales and wings. When you stand in an open field and watch one land, you are not watching an animal. You are watching something that was never meant to be ordinary. Alduin is called the World Eater. Most people assume that means he is simply evil, a villain who wants to destroy for the pleasure of it. But the lore describes something different. Alduin was created with a specific purpose. His role, given to him at the beginning of time, was to consume the world at the end of an era, not out of hatred, not out of greed, because that was the task assigned to him. The world runs in cycles. It builds, it ages, it ends, and something new begins. Alduin was meant to be the ending. The problem is that he grew proud. He stopped waiting for the right moment and began his work early. That is what made him a threat. Not his nature, but his impatience. Even the World Eater was once simply doing his job. The Dragon War was not a single battle. It was centuries of slow and brutal conflict between men and dragons across the entire northern land. Dragons ruled in those early years. They demanded worship. They treated men as lesser things. The ancient Nords resisted, but they had no real way to fight back. Dragons were nearly impossible to kill. Cutting one down with swords and arrows was not enough. The soul remained, and the body would eventually return. Something had to change. The wind moves differently through the ruins of that era. You can feel it sometimes in the older tombs, a heaviness that does not come from stone alone. It comes from memory, from the weight of a war that lasted so long it shaped everything that came after it. The ancient Nords did not discover the Thuum on their own. They did not find it written in a book or carved on a wall by some earlier scholar. A dragon taught them. His name was Parthenax. He was one of Alduin's most trusted commanders, and he chose, at some point during the war, to change sides. He went to the men. He taught them the voice, the same weapon the dragons had always used against them. That act changed the entire conflict. Men who could shout could fight dragons on closer terms. Parthenax gave them that. He then climbed to the top of the throat of the world and stayed there. For thousands of years, he sat in the cold and the silence, teaching, waiting, carrying what he had done without ever putting it down. Killing a dragon does not end it. This is one of the more unusual details in Skyrim's lore. When a dragon's body dies, its soul does not disappear. It travels to Aetherius, the realm of pure magic that exists beyond the stars. It waits there. Dragons can return. Their bodies reform. Their presence returns to the world in time. The only way to truly end a dragon, to stop that cycle, is for a dragonborn to absorb the soul. A dragonborn consumes it completely. The soul does not go back to Aetherius. It becomes part of the dragonborn instead. That is the real power of the dragonborn. Not strength, not magic. The ability to end something that was otherwise without an ending. During the height of dragon rule, there were men who did not resist. There were men who served. The dragon priests were mortal people who chose to worship dragons as gods, because to them that is exactly what dragons were. They built temples. They enforced the dragon's will over other men, and in return, the dragons gave them something rare. The priests were granted long life, a kind of near immortality through the power their dragon masters shared with them. When the dragon war ended and the dragons fell, the priests did not simply die. Many were sealed in their tombs, preserved by old magic, still bound by the oaths they swore. They became the Dragalords you find in the deepest parts of Nordic ruins, still guarding, still loyal to masters who stopped coming back a very long time ago. Odahviing is one of the dragons who returns when Alduin calls them back in Skyrim's main story. His name has a meaning. In the dragon language, it translates roughly to winged snow hunter. Alduin gave him that name personally. Dragon names in this lore are not just labels. They describe the dragon's nature. They are a small piece of identity carved into the language of creation itself. Odahviing is large, red-scaled, and built for cold places. The name fits. When you lure him to Dragon's Reach and trap him on the great porch above Whiterun, you are capturing something that carries its own description in its name. Even pinned and grounded, the name still holds. A snow hunter caught in a city of men waiting for a conversation instead of a fight. Speaking of Dragon's Reach, the great hall above Whiterun was not always called that. The name came from a single event. King Olaf One-Eye, a legendary Nordic king, once captured a living dragon. The dragon's name was Numenex. Olaf did not kill him. He imprisoned him. He brought Numenex back to the hall and held him there. The hall was renamed Dragon's Reach to mark what had been done. Numenex eventually died in captivity, but his skull remained. It still hangs on the wall above the great fire inside Dragon's Reach when you visit in the game. Thousands of years have passed since Olaf dragged him there. The logs in the fire have been replaced countless times, but the skull stays. A quiet reminder of something that once breathed in that very room. The Thuum is not a spell. This is important to understand. When a mage casts a fireball, they are pulling energy from a reservoir of power and shaping it into flame. The Thuum does not work that way. The dragon language is the language of creation itself. When a dragon, or a dragonborn, speaks a word of power, they are not describing something. They are making it happen. The word for fire does not mean fire. It is fire. The word and the thing are the same. That is why learning a single word takes so long. That is why the greybeards spend their entire lives mastering just a few shouts. You are not learning a language. You are learning to speak in the same voice that built the world. Even a single word used carelessly can shake the ground beneath your feet. Dragons came before almost everything else in Skyrim's history. Before the holds, before the jarls, before the roads and the mead halls and the cold stone cities. They were here when the land was still being decided. Some part of that remains. The mountains remember it. The old The Dwemer are gone, but their halls are not empty. Something about their ruins feels different from other old places in Skyrim, heavier, more deliberate, like everything inside was built to last forever on purpose. The Dwemer were elves, but they thought differently from every other elven group in Tamriel. Most elves held strong beliefs in gods and divine beings. The Dwemer rejected all of that completely. They looked at the gods and saw something they did not trust. They called divine beings false constructs, ideas that weaker minds clung to for comfort. Instead of worship, they chose study. Instead of prayer, they chose machinery and logic and careful observation. They believed that the answers to every question in existence could be found through reason alone. No faith required. No gods needed. This was not a casual opinion held by a few thinkers. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. Every tunnel they carved, every machine they built, every city they raised beneath the earth, all of it grew from that single rejection. They decided the universe was a system to be understood, not a gift to be grateful for. That choice shaped everything they ever made. In the year 1E 700, during a massive battle at Red Mountain in Morrowind, the Dwemer disappeared. Not slowly, not over generations. In a single moment, every Dwemer in existence simply stopped being there. Soldiers who had been fighting seconds before were gone. Cities full of people, gone. There was no warning that anyone recorded. There was no explanation that anyone agreed on. The battle continued around the empty space they left behind. Other races picked up their weapons and kept fighting, stunned, unsure of what had just happened. Historians and scholars have studied that moment for thousands of years since. They still do not have a clean answer. The disappearance of the Dwemer is one of the largest unsolved questions in all of Elder Scrolls lore. An entire civilization, present one moment and absent the next, leaving nothing behind except their buildings and their machines. What makes the disappearance even harder to explain is what was not found afterward. When a city is destroyed, there are usually remains. When a people die, there are bodies, there is ash, there are bones, there is something physical left behind to mark that living things once stood in that place. The Dwemer left none of that. Not a single body was ever recovered, not one set of bones, not ash, not clothing still holding the shape of someone who had been wearing it. Nothing organic remained at all. Every Dwemer, from the oldest scholar to the youngest child, vanished without leaving a trace that could be examined, studied, or mourned. The ruins they built still stand. The pipes still carry steam. The halls still hum with old energy. But the people themselves left no mark of dying. It is as if they were simply removed from the equation entirely. There is one exception. One Dwemer survived. His name was Yagrum Bagan, and the reason he survived is strange in its own right. At the moment of the disappearance, Yagrum was not in the same plane of existence as everyone else. He had been traveling through an outer realm, a different dimension, separate from the mortal world. When he returned, his entire race was gone. He was the last. He eventually settled in Morrowind, in the care of a wizard named Devaith Fear, where he spent his remaining years in a body ravaged by a disease called Corpus. Players who have completed Morrowind can meet him. He sits in a room full of books and broken things, enormous and slow, answering questions about a people he barely had time to say goodbye to. He does not know what happened to his race any more than anyone else does. He was simply elsewhere when the moment came. That small accident of timing made him the last living record of an entire civilization. Their makers have been gone for thousands of years, but the machines still run. Deep inside Dwemer ruins, scattered across Skyrim and beyond, the brass automatons continue to patrol the same corridors they patrolled before the disappearance. Centurions, the large heavy constructs built for combat, still activate when they sense movement nearby. Spheres roll silently through ancient hallways and unfold into armed guardians without hesitation. Spiders skitter across floors, repairing things, carrying out small tasks no one assigned them recently. These machines were built so well, powered by systems so durable, that several thousand years of abandonment have not stopped them. They have no awareness that their creators are gone. They have no understanding that the civilization they serve no longer exists. They simply continue. In the dim amber light of those ruins, surrounded by the hiss of old steam pipes, the machines go on doing exactly what they were made to do, waiting for masters who are never coming back. In the rift, tucked into the eastern part of Skyrim, there is a Dwemer ruin called Kagrenzel. It looks like other ruins from the outside. But inside, past its puzzles and its traps, there is a chamber that contains something unexpected. Skeletal remains. Enormous ones. The bones found there are far larger than anything a mammoth could produce. They do not match any creature that currently lives in Skyrim. They do not match any creature that scholars have been able to firmly identify. Players who explore that chamber tend to stop and stare. The bones sit there quietly in the dark, partially embedded in the stone, as if whatever creature they belonged to fell there a very long time ago and the ruins simply grew around it. No record explains what the Dwemer were keeping there or what those remains are. Kagrenzel offers no answers. It just holds the bones and waits the way old places tend to do. The Dwemer believed that sound was not just a feature of the world. They believed it was the world's hidden structure. Their philosophy, called tonal architecture, held that vibration and resonance were the hidden foundation beneath all of physical reality. In other words, they believed that if you understood sound deeply enough, if you could control the precise tones that held matter together, you could reshape anything. Change the sound, change the object, change the resonance, change the substance of reality itself. This was not considered a fringe idea among the Dwemer. It was central to their most advanced engineering. Their tools, their weapons, their most powerful devices, all of them were built around this principle. The sound of their ruins, the low mechanical hum that runs through the walls and floors, may not be accidental. It may be a remnant of that philosophy, a frequency still running through old stone, doing something very slow and very quiet that no one currently alive fully understands. Before electricity, before modern plumbing, before steam engines appeared in the wider world, the Dwemer had already built all of those things underground. Their cities had running water carried through pipe systems built into the walls. They had ventilation. Fresh air moved through their tunnels through carefully designed channels. They used steam power to run their machines, heat their halls, and drive their elevators. No other civilization in Tamriel during the First Era came anywhere close to that level of engineering. The races above ground were using fire and muscle and wood. The Dwemer were building cities beneath mountains that could sustain thousands of people indefinitely without relying on weather, seasons, or the surface world at all. You can still see it when you walk through their ruins. The pipes still carry pressure. The gears still turn. The craftsmanship is so precise that thousands of years of sitting empty have barely touched it. The most widely discussed theory about the Dwemer disappearance involves a man named Kagrenak and a divine object called the Heart of Lorcan. Kagrenak was the Dwemer's chief engineer and philosopher. He discovered the Heart, an immensely powerful divine artifact buried beneath Red Mountain. He built special tools designed to interact with it, to draw its power and use it for Dwemer purposes. At the moment of the battle, he used those tools, and every Dwemer vanished. Most scholars believe this was not the intended outcome. The leading theory is that Kagrenak made an error, that he struck the heart incorrectly, or that he did not fully understand what he was touching. The result was not death, or at least not ordinary death. Some researchers believe the Dwemer were transformed, pulled out of their physical forms, and converted into something else entirely, something that has no shape in the mortal world. Not gone, changed. Into what? Nobody has agreed on. The heart still sits beneath Red Mountain. The question of what Kagrenak actually did to his people has never been fully closed. The Dwemer solved problems that other races had not even thought to ask yet. And then, in the span of a single breath, they were gone. Their halls kept running. Their machines kept moving. Their pipes kept carrying water through stone corridors that no one walks anymore. Whatever they became, whatever happened in that moment at Red Mountain, they left behind a world that still hums quietly with everything they built. That hum has not stopped. It just has no one left to explain it. The Nords of Skyrim did not fear death the way most people do. They prepared for it. They talked about it openly around fires and in mead halls. To them, death was not an ending. It was a door, and what waited on the other side had a name. Sovngarde is the Nordic afterlife. It is described in the oldest texts as a golden land wrapped in soft mist, ruled by a figure called Shor, the Nordic name for the god Lorcan. Warriors who reach Sovngarde do not simply rest there. They feast at long tables, they fight with old friends, and they wake the next morning to do it again. There is no real pain in Sovngarde. There is no loss. Every battle there is joyful rather than desperate because no one is truly at risk of dying again. The mist that covers the realm gives it a permanent feeling of quiet, like early morning before the rest of the world has woken up. When you walk through Sovngarde yourself during the main quest line, the light has a golden grey quality that feels separate from everything else in the game. It does not look like Skyrim. It looks like somewhere that exists just slightly outside of time. That feeling is deliberate. Sovngarde is not a place you stumble into. It is a place you earn. Earning it, however, required something specific. The old Nordic belief held that a warrior who died bravely in combat, or at least facing death without running from it, would find the doors of Sovngarde open to them. The manner of dying carried weight. A soldier who fell defending their hold, a hunter who was taken down while standing their ground, a sailor who went down with their ship without panic. These were the deaths that counted. Dying of illness in a warm bed was not shameful, but it was less certain. The Nords believed that courage in the final moment was what the door required. You did not need to be famous. You did not need to have won every fight. You needed to have faced your last moment with your eyes open. That belief shaped how Nords approached almost everything: combat, loyalty, the way they spoke about risk. Death was always somewhere nearby. The question was only whether you would meet it well. Not everyone who died in the old Nordic world went to Sovngarde. Some stayed. The Draugr are ancient Nordic warriors whose fate was decided not by how they died, but by who they served in life. Dragon priests held enormous power during the age of dragon rule. Some warriors swore oaths of service to those priests, deep, binding oaths that did not end at death. When these warriors died, the oaths pulled them back. They did not pass through any door. They remained in the tombs, standing guard, carrying out a duty that the living world had long since moved on from. The Draugr you find in Nordic ruins are not monsters who crawled out of the dark by accident. They are soldiers still reporting for duty. The priest they serve may be dust. The civilization that gave that service meaning may be entirely gone. But the oath remains, and so they remain with it, walking cold stone corridors for thousands of years, waiting for orders that will never come. Some of those Draugr still shout. You hear it in the deeper tombs, a rush of ancient sound that throws you backward or freezes the air around you. The Thuum coming from a dead warrior who has been in the dark for thousands of years. This is not something the Draugr learned after death. The voice was placed inside them while they still lived. Dragon priests bound specific words of power into their most elite warriors as a form of permanent weapon, a tool that would keep working even after the body stopped breathing. The binding was old magic, tied to oaths and dragon power rather than conventional spell work. It did not fade with time the way most enchantments do. So, when you step too close to a Draugr Deathlord in a tomb that has been sealed for 3,000 years, and it opens its mouth and the air shifts, that is a sound that predates almost everything else in the world you are standing in, old beyond measuring, still working exactly as intended. The dragon priests who bound those words into their warriors also had a different purpose for the Thuum. They built word walls. These are the large carved stone tablets found throughout Skyrim, outside ruins, at the edges of ancient sites, in places that feel deliberately chosen rather than accidental. Word walls were not decorations. They were a storage system. The dragon priests carved words of power into stone so the knowledge would not be lost, so that someone worthy who came later would be able to find it and learn. The carving itself was a careful act. The words on a word wall carry meaning that goes beyond language. They hold something of the power they describe, dormant inside the stone. When a dragonborn stands in front of a word wall, something passes between the stone and the person. A piece of knowledge moving from one form into another. The walls have stood through every storm, every war, and every change of era that Skyrim has seen. The priests built them to last. They were right. Kine is a name that comes up less often than it should. She is the Nordic version of Kinnereth, but the Nordic version is older and sharper. where Kinnereth in the imperial tradition is soft and gentle, a goddess of nature and wind who feels peaceful. Kine in the older Nordic belief was something with more edge to it. She was the patron of warriors. She was associated with the hunt, not the quiet appreciation of nature, but the active pursuit, the cold morning, the arrow released with steady hands. Ancient Nordic texts describe Kine as the one who breathed life into the first men. She was present at the beginning of human existence in this tradition, and she carried a warrior's nature rather than a healer's warmth. When the old Nords prayed before a hunt or before a battle, it was often Kine they addressed. She was the force behind the wind that carries an arrow true. She was the cold that keeps a hunter sharp. Knowing that changes the feeling of the wind in Skyrim slightly. The next time it moves through the trees near Riverwood or across the open tundra near Whiterun, consider what the Nords believed was behind it. Soul gems are common in Skyrim. You find them in shops, in ruins, in the pockets of mages. You use them to enchant weapons and recharge staves. They feel like tools, ordinary resources in a world full of resources. But some lore texts describe what actually happens to a soul that gets captured inside one. The soul does not simply go to sleep. It does not dissolve into raw energy. Some sources suggest the soul remains aware, present, conscious inside the gem, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except exist in a space smaller than a closed fist. The gem gets used, the enchantment gets applied, the soul gets consumed in that process and is gone. There is no ceremony for it, no acknowledgement, just a tool being used and a consciousness ending quietly in the middle of someone's workbench. The game does not linger on this detail. It leaves the gems sitting in your inventory without explanation. But the lore left a note about it for whoever thought to look. There was a place for those who did not reach Sovngarde and did not end up bound as Draugr. The Nords called it the Void. Not a place of punishment, that is important to understand. The Void was not described as painful or cruel. It was simply empty, cold, dark, featureless. A Nord who died without honor, or whose soul was simply lost in the shuffle of death, would drift there without destination. No feasting, no fighting, no warm fire, no old friends. Just an absence that stretched in every direction without end. The Nords did not use the void as a threat the way some cultures use punishment in the afterlife. They used it as a reason to live with intention, to face things rather than avoid them, to be present in your own life so that your death would mean something. The void was not a warning. It was simply what happened when nothing else could be claimed. Alduin's reach extended beyond the living world. The oldest Nordic texts do not describe him only as a destroyer of the physical world. They describe him feeding on Sovngarde itself. The souls of the honored dead, warriors who had earned their place at Shaw's table, became his food. He entered that misty golden realm and consumed them. The heroes who had died bravely, who had passed through the right door, who had earned their rest, he was taking them. When the dragonborn reaches Sovngarde, near the end of the main quest line, the realm is dimmer than it should be. The mist is thicker. The warriors who remain are weakened and afraid in a way that feels wrong for the place they are supposed to inhabit. Alduin had been feeding there. The World Eater's appetite did not stop at the boundary between the living world and the dead one. Nothing was outside his reach until the Dragonborn stepped through that door and ended it. Death in Skyrim is not a simple thing. It never was for the people who built that world and filled it with meaning. The tombs are not just graves. The mist of Sovngarde is not just atmosphere. Every cold corridor and carved stone wall carries the weight of a belief held by people who thought very carefully about what happens after the last breath. That weight does not go away. It just grows quiet the way old things do. And quiet is exactly right for where we are tonight. There is a place at the very northern edge of Skyrim where the land runs out and the sea takes over. A bridge of old stone crosses to a collection of towers that have stood longer than almost anything else in the province. The College of Winterhold does not look like much from the outside, but the things buried beneath it and the knowledge stored inside it tell a different story. The College of Winterhold is older than most people give it credit for. The holds of Skyrim, Whiterun, Riften, Solitude, Markarth feel ancient when you walk through them. But the college predates most of them as a functioning institution. It has operated continuously through wars, political changes, dragon attacks, and the collapse of entire empires. Governments rose and fell around it. Borders shifted. Kings died and were replaced. the college remained. It kept its doors open to mages from every race during periods when those races were not always welcome in Skyrim itself. That kind of endurance is rare. Most institutions built by people tend to reflect the politics of whoever is currently in charge. The college, through most of its history, tried to stand slightly apart from all of that, not always successfully, but the effort was consistent. When you walk through its halls during the game, you are walking through something that has been accumulating knowledge, argument, and quiet discovery for a very long time. The Great Collapse happened in 4E 122. In a single night, most of the city of Winterhold fell into the Sea of Ghosts. Buildings, streets, homes, all of it dropped into the water. The college stood. That detail, the college surviving while the city around it crumbled, was enough for the people of Skyrim to make up their minds. The mages did it. Somehow, through their experiments or their carelessness or their arrogance, they caused this. No evidence ever supported that conclusion. No investigation found a connection between anything the college was doing and the geological event that destroyed the city. Skyrim had been experiencing significant instability in that era. The Red Year in Morrowind had sent shockwaves through the region that researchers believe contributed to the collapse. But facts rarely travel as fast as blame does. The people of Winterhold needed a reason. The college was there. It had survived when their homes had not. That was reason enough for many of them, and the resentment never fully healed. Beneath the ancient ruins of Sarthal, the oldest Nordic settlement in all of Skyrim, something was buried. The object is called the Eye of Magnus, and the people who put it there did not do so carelessly. Sarthal was one of the first places humans built when they came to Skyrim from Atmora. The settlement grew around something they had found, or been given, that was too powerful to move and too dangerous to leave unguarded. The Eye of Magnus is a sphere of immense magical energy, the origin and full nature of which the lore does not completely explain. What the lore does say is that placing an entire city over it was considered the safest available option. Not a vault, not a sealed chamber somewhere remote. A living city, full of people, built around the object specifically because that kind of constant human presence was thought to be the most reliable concealment available. The snow elves who attacked and burned Sarthal in the early Merethic era may have done so because of the eye. The Nords always described the Night of Tears, that attack, as a territorial act of violence. But some researchers believe the snow elves knew what was buried there and wanted it for themselves. When the Nords rebuilt and eventually abandoned Sarthal, they sealed the lower chambers. The eye remained underground, sitting in the dark for thousands of years while the surface above it changed hands and purposes and eventually became a ruin. The college only discovered it during a sanctioned excavation much later. When the Archmage Encano attempted to use the eye during the college questline, the results were immediate and severe. The object does not respond gently to being touched. The ancient Nords understood this. That is precisely why they built a city on top of it, rather than trying to use it. On a clear night in Skyrim, the stars are bright and numerous. They look the way stars always look, distant lights arranged across a dark sky. But the lore behind them is different from what most people expect. Those lights are not simply stars in the astronomical sense. They are holes. Aetherius is the realm of pure magic that exists beyond the physical world, beyond the barrier that separates the mortal plane from the divine. The stars are points where that barrier is thin enough for Aetherius to bleed through. The light you see in the night sky over the throat of the world or above the plains of Whiterun is magical energy leaking into the mortal world from the other side of reality. Magnus, the god of magic, fled the creation of the mortal world before it was finished. When he left, he tore a hole in the barrier on his way out. That hole became the sun, the largest and most constant source of magical light in the sky. The smaller holes his followers made when they followed him became the stars. Every night in Skyrim, you are looking at the scars left behind by a god who changed his mind about being here. Restoration is the magic school most people underestimate. Healing spells, ward spells, useful, certainly, but not the kind of thing that feels powerful in the way destruction magic does. The lore around advanced restoration, however, describes something much broader than healing cuts and mending bones. High-level restoration magic can weaken undead creatures by attacking the unnatural energy that holds them together. It can push back Daedric entities using the same principle, disrupting the foreign energy that allows them to exist in the mortal world. The most advanced theoretical applications, described in texts found throughout the college, suggest that restoration magic at its outer edge may be capable of interacting with time itself, slowing processes, preserving states, holding things in a particular moment longer than they would naturally remain. Most mages never get close to that level. The school is often treated as a support system for more aggressive magic, but the scholars who built its foundations were thinking about something considerably larger than keeping a follower alive during a dungeon run. Shalador was an archmage who lived during the First Era, and the stories about him have a quality that is difficult to separate from legend. He is credited with building Labyrinthian, the massive Nordic ruin in Hjalmarch that becomes relevant during the college questline. He allegedly created an entire island, Ivea, through magical means and used it as a sanctuary for mages. Some texts describe him inscribing magical knowledge into the physical landscape of Skyrim itself, not into books or scrolls, but into the land, encoded into the structure of certain places so that only someone with the right knowledge would recognize what they were looking at. Whether all of these accounts are accurate is difficult to verify. The First Era was a long time ago, and records from that period tend to accumulate embellishment over centuries, but the ruins associated with Shalador have a consistency to them, a design logic that suggests a single, very deliberate mind. Something about those places feels purposeful in a way that ordinary ruins do not. Magic in Skyrim costs magicka, a reserve of energy that refills over time. This is the mechanical version. The lore version is slightly different and considerably more serious. Magical energy does not come from nowhere. At its foundation, it draws from the caster's own life force. For most spells, the drain is minor enough that the body recovers without issue. But there is a threshold. Push a spell hard enough, attempt something that exceeds what the body can support, and the magic begins drawing from something deeper than the magicka reserve. It begins drawing from the life itself. There are records in the College of Mages who attempted spells beyond their capacity and did not survive the attempt, not because the spell failed and something went wrong externally, because the spell worked exactly as it was supposed to, and the cost was simply more than the caster had left to give. Magic in this world is not a safe system with comfortable limits. It is a tool borrowed from forces larger than the person holding it. Most of the time, the borrowing is manageable. Sometimes it is not. The college stands at the edge of the world, over a cold sea, in a city that mostly resents it. It has been doing that for a very long time. Inside its walls, people are still asking the same questions that mages asked there 1,000 years ago. The answers keep changing. The questions stay the same. That is probably how it should be. In the city of Whiterun, above the market and the wind-worn streets, there is a hall called Jorvaska. It is old and loud and smells of mead and worn leather. The people inside it carry a history that stretches back further than the city around them, further than Skyrim itself. The companions trace their beginning to a single violent event. Long ago, in the early days of human settlement in Skyrim, the snow elves attacked and burned Sarthal, the first Nord city on the continent. The Nords who survived fled back across the sea to Atmora. Ysgramor grieved his sons, gathered his people, and eventually returned with 500 warriors at his back. Those 500 came to reclaim the land and to drive the snow elves out. They were not a random collection of volunteers. They were a selected group, loyal to Ysgramor personally, willing to cross a frozen sea and fight a war with no guaranteed ending. The companions as an institution trace their direct origin to those 500. The battle bonds formed on that crossing, and in the fights that followed, became the foundation of everything the companions would eventually stand for. Honor, loyalty, the willingness to show up when things are hardest. All of it started with 500 people on a ship heading toward a war they chose to enter. What most people in Skyrim do not realize is that the companions did not begin in Skyrim. The Brotherhood existed in Atmora before Ysgramor ever sailed south. Atmora was the original homeland of the Nords, a cold continent far to the north, now almost entirely frozen and uninhabitable. The warrior tradition that would become the companions was already forming there, among people who had not yet set foot on the land they would eventually call their own. When Ysgramor led his 500 across the sea, he was not creating something new. He was bringing something that already existed to a new place. The companions, in that sense, are older than Skyrim. They carry the memory of a homeland that most Nords have never seen and could not survive today. That origin gives them a weight that other institutions in Skyrim do not quite have. They are not a product of this land. They came from somewhere older, colder, and now almost entirely lost. The Circle is the inner group that leads the companions. Skjor, Ela, Vilkas, Farkas, and Kodlak Whitemane form it during the events of Skyrim. To most members of the companions, the Circle is simply the leadership, experienced warriors who have earned the right to guide the group. But the Circle carries a secret that the general membership does not know. Every member of the Circle is a werewolf. They carry the beast blood, the ability to transform into a large, powerful wolf form under the right conditions. This has been true for a long time. It is not openly discussed. New members train, fight, and serve without being told. Only those invited into the Circle learn the truth. The secret is kept not out of shame exactly, but out of caution. The beast blood changes things. It changes the way a person relates to the world, to violence, to death. Not every warrior who joins the companions would welcome that change if they understood it fully before agreeing to it. The beast blood did not come from nature. The companions acquired lycanthropy through a deliberate arrangement with a Daedric prince named Hircine, the Lord of the Hunt. At some point in the companions' history, a group of their leaders made a pact. They wanted more power. Hircine offered it through the beast blood. The arrangement gave the Circle members enhanced strength, speed, and the ability to transform. What the pact also included, what those leaders may not have fully understood at the time, was a claim on their souls. A member of the Circle who dies while carrying the beast blood does not go to Sovngarde. Their soul belongs to Hircine. It goes to his realm, the hunting grounds, where the hunt continues forever. For a Nord warrior, that is a serious cost. Sovngarde is what they fight toward. It is the reward their culture has promised them their entire lives. Trading that away for power in the mortal world is a bargain that sits unevenly once the initial gain fades and the full weight of what was given up becomes clear. Kodlak Whitemane understood that weight better than most. He was the harbinger of the companions during the events of Skyrim, the closest thing the group had to a leader, though even that title carries specific meaning among them. Kodlak was old. His body had been carrying the beast blood for decades, and in his final years, he became focused on a single goal that had nothing to do with battle or strength. He wanted the cure, not for the transformation itself. He had made peace with what he was in life. He wanted the cure so that when he died, his soul would be free to go to Sovngarde. He did not want Hircine's hunting grounds. He wanted the hall, the fire, the old warriors, the mead. He wanted the afterlife his culture had promised warriors since before he was born. He did not live to complete the search himself. The companions continue it for him after his death, and the quest line eventually gives his soul the release he spent his last years hoping for. It is one of the quieter, more human stories in a game full of dragons and world-ending prophecies. Among the companions, there is a tradition older than the beast blood and older than most of the lore that surrounds the group. Shield siblings, the term used for the bond between companions, describes something the group considers closer than ordinary friendship, and in many cases closer than family. The idea is that the person who stands beside you in a fight, who chooses to be there without being required to, who has seen you at your worst and shown up the next morning anyway, that person holds a different place in your life than anyone connected to you only by blood or obligation. The companions built their entire social structure around that bond. The trust between Shield siblings is treated as one of the most serious commitments a person can make. It is not ceremonial. It does not involve formal vows or witnessed agreements. It is simply the result of standing next to someone long enough in hard enough situations that the relationship becomes its own kind of permanent. Ysgramor carried an axe called Wuthrad. It was his primary weapon during the campaign to reclaim Skyrim, and the Nords who fought alongside him treated it as something more than a tool. It became a symbol of everything the 500 had crossed the sea to do. After Ysgramor died, the axe was eventually shattered, broken into fragments that were scattered and kept separately. The companions held onto those pieces for centuries. They did not discard them or lose track of them. They preserved each fragment carefully, passing the pieces down through generations of members, waiting for the right moment to reassemble the weapon. When the companion's questline requires you to bring the pieces together and have Wuthrad reforged, you are completing something that warriors have been holding in trust for an enormous span of time. The axe is not just old, it is old in a way that carries accumulated intention. Every person who kept a piece of it was keeping faith with everyone who came before them. The companions do not have official ranks in the way most organizations do. There is no promotion system. No one assigns titles or adjusts anyone's standing through a formal process. The harbinger, the closest role to a leader, is not a commander. The word itself means something closer to guide or representative. Even that position does not come with the authority to issue orders that everyone must follow. Respect within the companions is earned through demonstrated ability and through how a person treats the people around them. A new member who arrives and fights well will be noticed. A veteran who has been there for years but treats others poorly will not hold the influence they might expect from seniority alone. It is a flat structure in a world full of hierarchies. In Skyrim, where jarls and thanes and stewards arrange themselves in careful order, Jorvaskr operates on something simpler. You earn your place every day, or you do not hold it. The Hall does not care about titles, it cares about who shows up. Jorvaskr has been standing in Whiterun for a very long time. The arguments inside it have probably not changed much over the centuries. Who gets the last of the mead? Whose turn it is to take a contract? Whether that new recruit is going to work out? The details shift, the people change. But the hall stays, and the fire at its center keeps burning, and the tradition that crossed a frozen sea to get here keeps going. Some things are built to last. The companions are one of them. Before the Nords, before the holds and the mead halls and the carved stone tombs, Skyrim belonged to someone else. They built here. They worshipped here. They called this land their own long before the first human ship crossed the sea from Atmora. Their story does not end well, but it deserves to be told quietly and in full. The snow elves were here first. That is the simplest way to say it. When the continent that would become Skyrim was still unnamed by human tongues, the snow elves had already built their civilization across it. They were not a primitive people scratching out survival in the cold. They had culture, religion, architecture, and a relationship with the land that had developed over a very long time. The exact scale of their civilization is difficult to measure now because so little of it survived what came after. But the records that do exist describe a people who were deeply connected to the natural world of Skyrim, its mountains, its forests, its long winters, in a way that shaped everything about how they lived. They were not visitors to this land. They were its first people. Everything that came after them, every Nord settlement and hold and tradition was built on ground that the snow elves had already walked for generations. The Night of Tears is what the Nords called it. The snow elves attacked Sarthol, the first human settlement in Skyrim, and burned it almost completely to the ground. Most of the Nord inhabitants were killed. The survivors, including Ysgramor and his sons, fled back across the sea to Atmora. For a long time, the story was told simply as an act of territorial aggression. The snow elves did not want humans on their land, so they destroyed the settlement and drove the survivors out. But later research, including texts found during the College of Winterhold questline, suggests a different reason. The snow elves may have known what was buried beneath Sarthol. The Eye of Magnus, an object of enormous power, sat under that settlement. The snow elves may have attacked not to claim territory, but to claim or destroy what the Nords had found or were building around, without understanding what it was. That changes the shape of the event considerably. It does not make the violence less real, but it places it in a context that is more complicated than simple hatred between neighboring peoples. Ysgramor did not accept what happened as a permanent loss. He returned to Atmora, gathered 500 warriors, and sailed back. The campaign that followed drove the snow elves progressively from every part of Skyrim. It was not a single battle. It was a long series of engagements across the entire continent, pushing the snow elves north, then east, then into corners where they had fewer and fewer options. Ysgramor's force was motivated by grief and by something harder than grief, the specific anger of people who had been displaced from a place they considered home. They were thorough. The snow elves who could not escape were killed. The ones who could escape fled south and underground. By the time the campaign was finished, the snow elves had no territory left to call their own. A people who had lived on this land for thousands of years were driven from every part of it in a span of time that, measured against their history, was very short. The land became Nordland. The snow elves became refugees with nowhere to go. With nowhere left above ground, the surviving snow elves made a decision that would destroy them more slowly and more completely than any battle had. They went to the Dwemer. The Dwemer lived underground, in vast cities carved from stone beneath the mountains of Skyrim and Morrowind. They were not known for generosity or sentiment, but they agreed to shelter the snow elves. The agreement, however, was not offered freely. The Dwemer set terms. The snow elves would be permitted to live in the underground cities to have shelter and protection from Isgramor's forces above. In exchange, they would serve. The nature of that service was left deliberately open at the start, a detail the snow elves may not have pressed hard enough. What seemed like a survival arrangement, a temporary state while they regrouped and found another way forward, became something permanent and increasingly dark. The Dwemer did not shelter the snow elves as equals or as guests. They sheltered them as property, and the snow elves, with no army left and no land left and nowhere else to go, stayed. The blindness did not happen at once. The Dwemer fed the snow elves a specific fungus as a primary food source. Over time, over generations, the fungus degraded their eyesight, first dimming it, then removing it entirely. Children born underground had weaker vision than their parents. Their children had less than that. Within a few generations, the snow elves living under Dwemer control were completely blind. Some researchers believe the Dwemer knew exactly what the fungus would do, that this was not an accidental consequence of an available food source, but a deliberate choice, a way to keep the snow elves permanently weakened, permanently dependent, permanently unable to navigate the surface world, even if they tried to leave. A people made blind in stages, slowly enough that by the time the full effect had settled in, the generation experiencing it had never known anything different. They could not compare their sight to their grandparents' sight. They could not remember what had been taken. They were simply in the dark, and the dark was all they had ever seen. Centuries passed. The Dwemer disappeared, that single moment at Red Mountain that removed an entire civilization. The snow elves who had been living under their control were suddenly alone in the underground cities. They had been blind for so long that the surface world was not a real option. They had served and survived in specific conditions for so long that the shape of what they were had changed. The creatures found in Dwemer ruins that the game calls Falmer are what they became, were hunched, pale, built low to the ground, their faces distorted by generations of change. They attack with a ferocity that has no strategy visible in it, no communication, no recognition of anything beyond immediate threat and response. Looking at a Falmer in a Dwemer ruin, it is nearly impossible to connect what you are seeing to the civilization that built Skyrim's oldest structures, that had its own theology and architecture and relationship with the land. But that is what they are. The distance between where they started and where they ended is one of the longest falls in all of Skyrim's history. Knight Paladin Gelebor did not fall. He is the only snow elf who did not follow the path of the others into the underground cities. He found a different sanctuary, a place called the Way Shrine of Auriel, deep within the Forgotten Vale, a hidden valley so isolated that almost nothing reached it. Gelebor was a devout follower of Auriel, the elven god equivalent to Akatosh, and he stayed in the Way Shrine to tend it and to guide pilgrims on a sacred path. He has been there for thousands of years. He did not transform. He did not degrade. His faith and his isolation preserved him. When the dragonborn finds him during the Dawnguard questline, Gelebor is calm, polite, and completely unaware of how much time has passed or what has happened to his people. He refers to the Falmer as his brethren who went astray. He does not know that astray is far too gentle a word for what occurred. His patience is not a performance. He genuinely believes that if he continues tending his shrine, things will eventually come right. The pilgrims will return. The faithful will come. He has been believing that for longer than most civilizations have existed. Gelebor keeps tending the Way Shrine, He keeps the water running, the candles lit, the paths between the shrines clear. He does it without being asked and without anyone watching. The pilgrims stopped coming thousands of years ago, but he has not adjusted his expectations to match that fact. He greets the dragonborn with the quiet courtesy of a man who has been waiting for a visitor and is simply glad one finally arrived. There is a particular kind of sadness in that, the sadness of someone who stayed faithful to something long after the thing itself was gone. He is not broken by it. He is simply still there, which in its own way is even harder to sit with than grief would be. The Falmer, despite everything, are not entirely gone in the way their culture is gone. Players who observe them carefully notice details that do not fit the image of mindless creatures. They build structures, crude shelters arranged in organized patterns within the ruins they inhabit. They craft their own weapons rather than simply using what is already available. They organize in groups with apparent coordination. They respond to situations with something that looks like decision-making rather than pure instinct. The old snow elf mind is buried very deep, but it did not disappear completely. Something in them still builds, still organizes, still chooses. It is not enough to call them a civilization, but it is enough to make a quiet case that what was done to them did not erase everything, only almost everything. And almost is a word that contains a significant amount of loss all on its own. Skyrim holds its history in layers. Some layers are visible, the roads, the ruins, the carved stone. Some layers are deeper and quieter. The snow elves are one of the deepest. They were here before the story that most people know began. And in the Falmer, in the dark beneath the mountains, pieces of them are still here now, older than the Nords, older than the Holds, still present in the dark, in a form no one who knew them before would recognize. Rest now. The next chapter waits. Most people in Skyrim treat the Daedric princes as dangers to avoid. Shrines to be left alone, names to be spoken carefully, if at all. But the princes are more layered than that simple warning suggests. They are not straightforwardly evil. They are something older and harder to categorize than evil. The Daedric princes are not villains in the way a story usually defines a villain. Each one is a force, a concentrated embodiment of a specific aspect of existence. Molag Bal embodies domination and enslavement. Azura embodies dawn, dusk, and fate. Namira embodies decay and the ancient darkness. They did not choose these domains the way a person chooses a profession. They are these things, completely and permanently, the way fire is heat. That is important to understand before drawing moral conclusions about any of them. Judging a Daedric prince for behaving according to their nature is like being upset at a river for moving downhill. The river does not have a choice about what it is, neither does the prince. What makes some of them dangerous to mortals is not malice in the human sense. It is that their nature, expressed fully, tends to be very difficult for mortal life to survive contact with. That is a different thing from evil. It does not make them safe, but it makes them something other than simply wicked. Hermaeus Mora is the prince of knowledge, memory, and fate. His realm, Apocrypha, is an endless library, grey and still, filled with books that contain every secret ever kept and every event that has ever occurred or will occur. Mora does not send his forces to conquer cities or claim territory. He is not interested in those things. What he wants is information. Every secret, every hidden truth, every piece of knowledge that a mortal tries to keep private, Mora considers it his. He catalogues, he collects, he waits. His demeanor in every interaction is patient and almost gentle in the way that something truly ancient can afford to be gentle because it has no urgency. He already knows how things will turn out. He already has the information he wants. He is simply waiting for the moment to arrive so it can be formally added to the collection. Spending time near Hermaeus Mora is deeply unsettling, not because he threatens you directly, but because he looks at every living person the way a librarian looks at a book that has not yet been filed. Azura stands apart from most of the Daedric princes in one specific way. She cares about her followers. Not in an abstract, distant sense, in a way that has produced concrete actions with real consequences. Before the disaster at Red Mountain, Azura warned the Dwemer people. She told them something terrible was coming. She gave them time to prepare and to move. Some listened, some did not, but she warned them. No other Daedric prince has a clear record of acting in the genuine interest of mortals in that way. Her motives are not entirely selfless. Azura is proud, and her followers' loyalty matters to her in ways that connect to her own nature. But the warning was real, and the Dunmer who heeded it survived because of it. Her shrine in Skyrim sits on a high cliff in the eastern part of the map, facing east toward the dawn. It is one of the quieter Daedric locations in the game. Standing there at the right time of day, with the light coming up over the mountains, it is easy to understand why someone would choose to pray in that direction. Meridia is unusual among the Daedric princes because her opposition to undeath places her, in practical terms, on the same side as most mortals who want the dead to stay dead. She finds the existence of undead creatures deeply offensive, not because they are dangerous, but because they represent a corruption of the life energy she values. Soul trapping, in her view, is similarly wrong. Taking a conscious soul and sealing it inside a gem to be used as a power source violates something she considers fundamental. She is not gentle about these views. Her questline in Skyrim involves her waking you up with a beam of light and speaking to you in a tone that does not suggest much patience for disagreement. She is not warm. She is not particularly interested in your feelings about the task she is assigning. But her goal in that questline, clearing a temple of undead and reclaiming it, is one that most people in Skyrim would consider straightforwardly good. A Daedric prince pursuing an outcome that ordinary people would endorse through methods they might find uncomfortable. That combination is very Meridia. Sheogorath is the Daedric prince of madness. He appears in Skyrim's Daedric questline in a manner that is warm, friendly, and completely unpredictable, which is consistent with what he is. He offers cheese. He speaks in non-sequiturs. He seems genuinely pleased to see you. But there is a layer to Sheogorath in Skyrim's timeline that most players do not immediately connect. In the Elder Scrolls game Oblivion, the main character, the hero of Kvatch, completed a lengthy quest in Sheogorath's realm and at the end of it, absorbed the mantle of madness themselves. They became Sheogorath. The eccentric, cheese-loving prince you meet in Skyrim is, according to this reading of the lore, a former mortal. A person who played a game, won it in an unexpected way, and found themselves permanently transformed into a god of madness. Whether that person is still in there somewhere, behind the randomness and the non-sequiturs, is not something the lore answers directly. But the question has a particular weight to it once you know to ask it. Hircine's realm is called the Hunting Grounds. Werewolves who die while carrying the beast blood go there, as established by the pact that the companions made generations ago. The hunting grounds are not described as pleasant or unpleasant in the way that human ideas of heaven and punishment are usually described. They are described as a place of constant pursuit, prey that runs, hunters that chase, a cycle that has no conclusion. For someone who loved the hunt in life, who found meaning in the chase and the catch, the hunting grounds might not feel like a punishment. Hircine's servants and champions tend to describe the realm with something close to satisfaction. The cycle continues. The chase never ends. There is always something to run toward or away from. Whether that sounds like reward or consequence depends entirely on the person considering it. For a Nord warrior who expected Sovngarde, it is a significant deviation from what they were promised. For someone whose nature always leaned toward the hunt, it might be exactly what they would have chosen. Mehrunes Dagon's razor is one of the more carefully managed dangerous objects in Tamriel. Mehrunes Dagon is the prince of destruction, change, and revolution, forces that, left unchecked, tend to produce outcomes that are difficult to recover from. The razor is his personal artifact, a blade with properties that make it particularly lethal. At some point in its history, a deliberate decision was made to break it. The razor was shattered into 3 pieces and distributed to separate keepers with instructions to hold them apart. The reasoning was straightforward. A complete razor, available and functional, represented a concentration of Dagon's influence in the mortal world that made too many people uncomfortable. Keeping it broken was a way of limiting that influence without destroying the artifact entirely, which may not have been possible. The Daedric questline in Skyrim involves reassembling it. The people who broke it apart and distributed the pieces knew exactly what they were doing and why. Someone putting it back together undoes that work in an afternoon. Nocturnal is the Daedric prince of night, shadow, and luck, and the patron of the Thieves Guild of Skyrim. The guild's relationship with her runs deeper than most members understand. The guildmaster makes a pact with Nocturnal, a piece of their soul pledged in exchange for her favor for the luck that makes the guild's work go more smoothly than it otherwise would. The Nightingales, a smaller order within the guild's upper ranks, serve her more directly and more knowingly. They guard her sepulchre in life and continue guarding it after death. Nocturnal's true nature, hinted at in the texts associated with her questline, is older and stranger than her role as a thief's patron implies. Some sources describe her as existing before the current era of the world, as something that predates the arrangement of things rather than simply being part of it. The guild members who pray to her for luck before a job are, in that reading, touching something considerably larger than a divine employer. They are reaching towards something that was old before the world they are standing in was built. The Daedric princes cannot enter the mortal world directly. This is one of the more important and less discussed facts about them. For all their power, and it is real, and it is vast, they are limited in how they can interact with the physical world. They send champions. They push influence through artifacts. They speak through dreams and visions and carefully chosen moments of contact. But they cannot simply walk into Tamriel and act. The barrier between their realms and the mortal world holds. It is one of the few structural features of the universe that limits something which might otherwise be unlimited. Every Daedric shrine, every champion chosen, every artifact created and sent into the world, these are all workarounds for that limitation. The princes are always operating at a distance, through proxies, through objects, through mortals willing to act on their behalf. That distance is the only thing standing between their nature and its full expression in a world that could not survive the contact. The Daedric princes move through Skyrim's world the way wind moves through a closed room, finding every small gap, every crack in a wall, every moment when someone is uncertain or afraid or wanting something badly enough to reach for it. They do not need to force anything. They simply wait for the opening. Tonight, the doors are all closed. The gaps are small. Rest easy. The war you see in Skyrim, Stormcloaks against Imperials, Blue against Red, Hold against Hold, did not begin with hatred between neighbours. It began with a piece of paper signed far away by people trying to survive something that had nearly destroyed everything they had built. The White Gold Concordat is the document at the centre of everything. It was a peace treaty signed between the Aldmeri Dominion and the Empire after the Great War, a conflict so damaging that the Empire, despite technically surviving it, was left in no position to make demands. The Dominion, led by the Thalmor, pushed for specific terms. One of those terms was the banning of Talos worship across all imperial territory. Talos, the man who had unified the empire, the Nord who became a god, was to be removed from official religion. No shrines, no prayers, no acknowledgement that he was divine. For the empire, signing that condition was a survival decision. For the Nords of Skyrim, it was something that could not be accepted quietly. Talos was not just a religious figure to them. He was proof that a person born into the cold and difficulty of that land could reach something eternal. Removing him from worship felt like removing something from their identity. The Concordat lit a fire that had been waiting for a reason to start. Ulfric Stormcloak is not a simple character. Before he became the Jarl of Windhelm and the leader of the Stormcloak Rebellion, he spent time at High Hrothgar studying the Thu'um under the Greybeards. He was not a casual student. He committed seriously to learning the voice, which requires years of disciplined practice and a particular kind of patience that politics does not usually encourage. That background makes him unusual among political leaders in Skyrim. He carries a skill that almost no living person outside the Greybeards possesses at any meaningful level. What he eventually did with that skill, and how he chose to use it in a political context, is where his story becomes harder to evaluate simply. The man who sat in the cold of High Hrothgar learning to control his voice is connected to, but not identical to, the man who later used that voice as a weapon in a throne room. High King Torygg died because of the Thu'um. Ulfric challenged him, and the challenge was accepted. That part followed old Nordic tradition. What was not traditional was the method. Ulfric used the voice against Torygg, and Torygg fell. The political reading of this event depends entirely on which side is describing it. Ulfric's supporters frame it as a traditional challenge, answered in the traditional way, a test of strength and right to rule. His opponents describe it as an execution carried out with a weapon Torrig had no counter for against a young king who had no meaningful chance. The law leaves both readings available. What is harder to dispute is the emotional weight of the moment. By multiple accounts, Ulfric did not seem satisfied by it. He did not celebrate. The kill accomplished something politically, and it cost him something personally, and the game allows you to reach your own conclusion about whether it was worth either. The Empire banned Talos worship, not because they agreed with the ban. The distinction matters and often gets lost in how people talk about the Civil War. Imperial officials in Skyrim enforce the Concordat because the Empire signed it and must be seen to honor it. But the actual belief that Talos should not be worshipped, that he was not genuinely divine, is a Thalmor position, not an imperial one. The Empire made a calculated decision that a living, imperfect empire with a painful compromise was more useful to the people of Tamriel than a dead empire with its principles intact. Whether that calculation was correct is exactly the kind of question that does not have a clean answer. Both the Stormcloaks who reject the compromise and the Imperials who accepted it are responding reasonably to the situation they inherited. They simply weighted different things as more important, and those different weightings produced a war. The Thalmor are watching the civil war carefully. Their embassy outside Solitude maintains detailed files on key figures from both sides. Their agents move through Skyrim with an interest that goes beyond simple intelligence gathering. And what those files reveal, accessible during the diplomatic community questline if you look carefully, is that the Thalmor do not want either side to win. A Stormcloak victory produces an independent Skyrim with strong nationalist feeling and a reason to hate the Dominion. An Imperial victory produces a unified empire that has recovered enough to be a threat again. Either outcome is worse for the Thalmor than a Skyrim that stays divided, depleted, and distracted. The Civil War, from the Thalmor perspective, is not a conflict to resolve. It is a resource to manage. Every month the war continues is a month the Empire is not rebuilding and Skyrim is not unified. That is the most uncomfortable reading of the entire conflict, that the people most benefiting from it are the ones who appear to have no direct role in it. General Tullius arrived in Skyrim with a military assignment and a practical outlook. He is not a Nord. He does not share the cultural stakes that make this conflict feel personal to almost everyone else involved. He does not particularly care about Talos, about the ancient traditions of Nordic governance, about what Ulfric represents to his followers, or about what a Stormcloak victory would mean for Nordic identity. He cares about ending an insurgency efficiently and returning Skyrim to stable imperial administration. That detachment makes him effective in some ways and limited in others. He understands the military problem clearly. He understands the political and cultural dimensions of the war considerably less well. Watching him interact with Jarl Elisif or with his own soldiers reveals a commander who is very good at the logistics of conflict and somewhat less good at understanding why the people around him feel the way they do about it. The Jarl system, the way Skyrim organizes its political structure into holds, each governed by a Jarl, is older than the Empire by a significant margin. It predates imperial involvement in Nordic affairs entirely. The holds were not created as administrative units for imperial governance. They grew from clan territories, from the natural way that groups of people in a cold and difficult landscape organized themselves around defensible locations with reliable resources. The Jarls were originally chosen through demonstrated strength and community trust rather than through inheritance or appointment. Over time, as Skyrim joined the Empire and political structures formalized, some of those original qualities faded, but the basic structure remained because it worked. The holds fit the land. The Jarl system fit the culture. Empires tend to work better when they adopt structures that communities have already proven rather than replacing them with imported ones. The High King of Skyrim was traditionally chosen through a moot, a gathering of all the Jarls who would collectively decide who among them or who among available candidates should lead. This system assumed that the Jarls would assemble, deliberate, and reach a consensus that the others would then honor. By the time of Skyrim's civil war, the moot had not functioned properly in a very long time. The political divisions between the holds, the complexity of imperial involvement, and the specific circumstances of Torrig's death had made any genuine moot nearly impossible to convene. The system that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of succession crisis, disputed leadership, competing claims, open conflict, had been gradually hollowed out until it could not perform the function it was designed for. What remains is the memory of the process without the substance. Every side in the civil war claims legitimacy. The mechanism that was supposed to adjudicate those claims is no longer capable of doing so. Beyond the borders of Skyrim, the Aldmeri Dominion is not idle. The evidence scattered throughout the game, in documents, in overheard conversations, in what Thalmor agents reveal when you press them, suggests that the Dominion views the current period as preparation rather than settlement. The Great War ended with a treaty, not a resolution. The Thalmor consider the ban on Talos worship a first step rather than a final victory. Their long-term objective, suggested clearly enough in the available texts, is the dismantling of the Empire entirely and the elimination of Talos from memory as well as from religion. The civil war in Skyrim is, in that reading, a side event, something happening in a province while the larger campaign continues to be planned elsewhere. Whoever wins the war in Skyrim will eventually have to face what is being prepared beyond it. The civil war is loud and present and feels like the main event. The thing being quietly organized further south is neither loud nor present. But it is coming. The war in Skyrim is real and its costs are real. Villages burned, families separated, old alliances broken. But the forces that started it reach back further than most of the people fighting it realize, and the forces waiting beyond it are larger than the war itself. Tonight, set that weight down. The history will still be there in the morning. There are objects in the world of Skyrim that do not belong to it in the way that other things belong to it. Swords belong to warriors, spells belong to mages, but the Elder Scrolls belong to nothing and no one. They simply exist, outside of every category that makes sense. The Elder Scrolls are not books. Using that word for them is a convenience, a way of referring to physical objects that can be held and transported and stored. But what they are, at their core, is something that the lore does not fully commit to explaining. They are described in various texts as fragments of creation itself, pieces of something that existed before the current arrangement of the world, preserved in a form that mortals can physically interact with even if they cannot fully understand what they are holding. They exist outside of time in a meaningful sense. They are not located in the past or the present or the future. They contain all three simultaneously, or something beyond all three that does not have a clean name in any language currently spoken in Tamriel. The physical scroll that a character holds during the game is only the most surface-level version of what the object actually is. What it actually is sits underneath that physical form, inaccessible to direct observation, doing something that defies ordinary description. No civilization made the Elder Scrolls. This is one of the few things that scholars across multiple traditions agree on, because every attempt to trace their origin runs into the same problem. They predate every source that might explain them. The Dwemer studied them. The Moth priests dedicated their order to reading them. The ancient Aldmer knew of them. Every civilization that encountered them found them already present, already complete, already doing whatever it is they do. There is no creation story for the scrolls. No divine being claims to have made them. No ancient text describes a time before they existed. They are simply there, at the beginning of every record, as if they arrived before the records did. That absence of origin is itself one of the most unusual things about them. Almost everything else in Tamriel's lore has a source. The Elder Scrolls have only presence, a presence that stretches back further than anything else that can be found. Reading an Elder Scroll without preparation damages the reader. This is not metaphorical. A person who picks up an Elder Scroll and attempts to read it without the specific training required will lose their sight. The blindness is immediate and permanent. That is the minimum consequence. Extended exposure before blindness sets in, or attempting to push past the initial damage, leads to something worse. The mind begins to come apart, not in a dramatic, visible way, quietly. The ability to keep thoughts in sequence, to distinguish between what is happening now and what happened before or has not happened yet, begins to dissolve. The scroll shows too much. The mind attempting to process what it is seeing cannot hold the shape of ordinary reality at the same time. What comes out of that collision is not understanding. It is damage. The scroll is not trying to harm the reader. It is simply too large for the instrument attempting to receive it. The moth priests exist specifically to bridge that gap. They are a dedicated order who spend their entire adult lives preparing to read the scrolls in a controlled way. Their training involves years of specific meditative and perceptual practices designed to change how they process what they see. They also cultivate moths, a particular species that is drawn to the scrolls and that, through sustained proximity, develops a sensitivity that the priest can use as a kind of buffer or guide during the reading process. Even with all of this preparation, the moth priests lose their sight. The training does not prevent the damage. It slows it, manages it, spreads it out across a lifetime rather than allowing it to arrive all at once. A trained moth priest who reads the scrolls many times over many years will eventually go blind, the way a candle eventually burns down regardless of how carefully you protect the flame. The order accepts this. The knowledge gained in the reading is considered worth the cost. It is a quiet form of dedication, choosing to spend your sight on something larger than yourself. The same Elder Scroll does not show the same thing to every reader. What a person sees when they read a scroll is shaped by who they are and when they are reading it. The scroll contains everything, but it reveals what is relevant to the moment and the reader encountering it. Two moth priests reading the same scroll in different years will report different prophecies, different sequences of events, different information. Neither reading is wrong. Neither is more accurate than the other. The scroll is not inconsistent. It is complete in a way that mortal minds can only access in pieces, and the piece that becomes visible is determined by the context of the reading. This makes the scrolls both more useful and less useful than a straightforward prophetic text would be. They tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. They do not tell you everything, and they do not tell you more than you are positioned to understand at the moment you are reading. The ancient heroes who faced Alduin the first time did not defeat him through combat alone. They used an Elder Scroll. The scroll allowed them to perform a specific act. They did not destroy Alduin. They could not. Instead, they used the scroll to cast him forward through time, displacing him from their era into an unspecified future moment. In practical terms, this means that the ancient Nords solved their problem by making it someone else's problem. Not out of cowardice, the act required enormous skill and sacrifice to perform, but the result was that Alduin was not ended. He was postponed. The dragonborn who faces him in the game is facing a problem that was created in the ancient past, packaged and sent forward by people who could not find a permanent solution and chose the best available temporary one. The Elder Scroll made that possible. It was a tool for reshaping time, used by people desperate enough to use it. Septimus Signus was a scholar who devoted himself to Elder Scroll research with an intensity that eventually cost him everything. He spent years alone on a large iceberg in the Sea of Ghosts, in a structure he built himself, studying a scroll in isolation. The cold and the silence and the sustained exposure to what the scroll contained worked on him slowly. By the time the Dragonborn finds him during the Discerning the Transmundane questline, his mind has already moved significantly away from ordinary function. He speaks in a way that is technically coherent, but organized around a logic that does not quite match the logic that other people use. He is still brilliant. The research he has done is still real and detailed and the product of serious work, but the person doing the research has been worn down by it in ways that cannot be recovered from. He made no dramatic mistake. He simply stayed too close to something too large for too long, and the accumulated weight of that proximity changed him past the point of return. Some texts in the Elder Scrolls lore describe the scrolls themselves as bones, specifically as the bones of dead gods, physical remnants of divine beings, or divine knowledge from a previous era of existence. In this framing, the scrolls are not records of what happened or what will happen. They are the actual substance of a previous version of reality. city, preserved in a form that can survive the transition between eras. When a new era begins and the old one ends, most of what existed before is gone. The scrolls in this reading are what remains, compressed into objects that carry the total weight of something that no longer exists in any other form. That is a different way of understanding why reading them causes damage. It is not that they contain too much information, it is that they are too much. Remnants of something that entire worlds were made of, condensed into a form that mortal hands can hold. There is a paradox at the center of every Elder Scroll prophecy. If you read a scroll to learn what will happen, and then you act on what you learned, your action becomes part of what was always going to happen. The scroll did not predict your choice. Your choice was already written in the scroll before you made it. This means that every person who has ever read an Elder Scroll and acted on it was not changing fate. They were completing it. The feeling of free choice, of reading the prophecy and deciding to act, is real in every subjective sense. But in the framework the scrolls operate within, the decision was already there, waiting for the moment when it would be made. The scrolls do not show what might happen. They show what is happening from a position outside the timeline where all of it has already occurred. The Elder Scrolls exist in places most people will never go and ask questions most people will never think to ask. That is probably as it should be. Some things are large enough that the best relationship most of us can have with them is a quiet, respectful distance. Let them sit in the dark. Let them hold what they hold. Sleep now. Most people who play Skyrim spend their time on roads and in cities, following markers on a map from one objective to the next. But the land itself, the actual geography of the province, holds things that the main questline never fully stops to explain. Tonight, we slow down and look at the land. The throat of the world is the tallest point in all of Tamriel. Not just in Skyrim, in the entire known world. Its peak sits so high that clouds form below it rather than around it. The snow at the top does not melt in summer the way snow melts at lower elevations. The cold up there is not seasonal. It is structural, part of what that place is, rather than a response to any particular weather. The Greybeards have lived near the summit for centuries, and their presence has added something to the mountain that is harder to describe than altitude or temperature. The Thuum they have practiced for so long has seeped into the stone. The air near High Hrothgar moves differently than air at the same elevation elsewhere. Standing at the very top, at the throat itself, the world below is so far away that it feels separated from you by more than just distance. The mountain does not feel like a mountain by the time you reach the top. It feels like the edge of something else entirely. Winterhold is a city that used to be much larger. Before the great collapse of 4E122, it was one of the more significant settlements in Skyrim, a city with real streets, real districts, real population. Then most of it fell into the sea overnight. What remains at the time of the game is a small collection of buildings huddled near the bridge that leads to the college. But the rest of the city did not disappear. It went into the water. The streets are still there beneath the surface of the Sea of Ghosts. The buildings are still standing, or partially standing, preserved by the cold of the water and the speed of their descent. On clear days, from the right angle on the shore, you can see the shapes of structures beneath the surface. A city frozen in the moment of its own destruction, still visible, still present in the water below where it used to stand above ground. Blackreach is one of the most unusual places in the game and one of the least expected. Most players discover it during the main questline and stop moving for a moment when they see it. Blackreach is a Dwemer-built underground space of enormous scale. Not a ruin in the ordinary sense, but an entire ecosystem that developed in the absence of sunlight over thousands of years. Bioluminescent fungi grow across the cavern floor and walls in blue and gold, providing the only light source in a space too large to see across. Charis and Falmer have made their home in its lower sections. A massive orb called the Ethereum War Sun hangs from the ceiling, a Dwemer construct that can be activated by shouting at it, suggesting it was built with knowledge of the Thuum in mind. The scale of Blackreach implies that the Dwemer were building on a level that even their other ruins do not fully suggest. This was not a working space or a storage facility. It was a city built in a space so large the Dwemer had to create their own light source to fill it. The rift is Skyrim's warmest hold, and its appearance reflects that in a way that makes it feel distinct from every other part of the province. While the rest of Skyrim tends toward greystone, white snow, and cold blue light, the rift stays amber. Its forests hold their color even in the months when other parts of Skyrim are buried under winter. The light there has a quality, warm, low-angled, filtering through leaves that stay orange and gold longer than they should, that gives the entire hold a feeling of permanent late afternoon. Riften sits within it, complicated and morally questionable as it is, surrounded by that gentle light. There is something almost contradictory about the corruption and difficulty inside Riften existing in a landscape that beautiful. The rift does not match the city it contains, or perhaps the city reflects the rift in a different way, something that looks warm and inviting from a distance and reveals its complications only once you are already inside it. Solstheim appears in the Dragonborn DLC and sits northeast of Skyrim's coast. It was not always a Morrowind territory. Originally, Solstheim was part of Skyrim, Nordic land, Nordic culture, Nordic history embedded in its soil and its old ruins. After the Red Year, when the eruption of Red Mountain devastated Morrowind and displaced enormous numbers of Dwemer people, the High King of Skyrim at the time made a decision. He gave Solstheim to Morrowind as a place where the Dwemer refugees could resettle and rebuild. It was a genuine act of generosity from a people not known for having much patience with their eastern neighbours. The island now carries the marks of both cultures. Old Nordic ruins sitting alongside Dwemer settlements, ash from Red Mountain coating the southern half of the island in a grey layer that nothing entirely grows through. Two peoples sharing a place that used to belong to one of them, and the land itself reflecting that complicated history in its geography. The Eldergleam Sanctuary is not famous the way some locations in Skyrim are famous. It does not appear on the main quest line. It sits quietly in the eastern part of Skyrim, accessible through a passage that requires a specific item to open, and inside it grows a tree. The Eldergleam is considered the oldest living thing in Skyrim. It predates the arrival of humans on the continent. It was already ancient when the snow elves were the primary inhabitants of the land. Its roots have grown through and around the stone of the sanctuary over so many thousands of years that the tree and the rock have become difficult to separate. The sanctuary is partly the tree, and the tree is partly the sanctuary. The light inside filters through golden leaves and falls on water that runs along channels in the stone floor. It is one of the most peaceful locations in the entire game, and it contains something older than almost everything else in the world around it. The Forgotten Vale was hidden well enough that it stayed forgotten for a very long time. It is a valley in the far northwest of Skyrim, accessible only through a specific passage that the main game never directs you toward. Inside, the snow elves who remained loyal to Oriel lived undisturbed while the rest of their people were underground, going blind, becoming Falmer. The isolation was so complete that Gelebor, the snow elf knight who tends the way shrine there, had no meaningful contact with the outside world for thousands of years. The Falmer who did eventually find their way into the Vale arrived there in their already degraded state, so Gelebor watched his brethren without recognizing them as what they had been. The Vale itself is beautiful in the specific way that places forgotten by the rest of the world tend to be beautiful, pristine, quiet, arranged in a way that suggests no one has disturbed it in a very long time. The Sea of Ghosts earned its name from a Nordic belief about the dead. Nords who drowned at sea, sailors, fishermen, anyone taken by the water rather than by land-based battle, were believed to be unable to find their way to Sovngarde. The sea took them and held them. Their souls, in this belief, remained beneath the surface rather than passing through the proper door. The Sea of Ghosts was named for those souls, the ones who could not leave, who drifted in the cold, dark water below the ships of the living. The name predates any map or official designation. It came from the people who worked the water and lost colleagues to it, and needed a way to explain where those colleagues had gone. Whether the belief is lore accurate is less clear than whether it was genuinely held. For the Nords who named that sea, it was not poetic language. It was a description of what they understood to be true. Labyrinthian does not look from the outside like what it used to be. It reads as a ruin in the mountains, old, broken, partially buried under decades of snow and indifference. But Labyrinthian was once a city, one of the significant cultural centers of early Skyrim, built during a period when Nordic civilization was more complex and more organized than the remains of it suggest. The Archmage Shalador is associated with it. It is believed he had a particular interest in the site and may have contributed to its magical construction. At some point, the city was abandoned. The specific circumstances are not cleanly documented. What remains is enormous enough in scale to suggest that what was lost was considerable. Walking through it during the college questline, past the frozen remains of people who died there long ago, the size of the original structure becomes clearer. It was not a village. It was a city. And whatever it was when it was functioning, it is very far from that now. Skyrim's landscape holds more history than any road can carry. The mountains and the water and the old trees have been here through every war, every disappearance, every era that built and collapsed and built again. The land does not forget any of it. It just grows quiet about what it knows, like everywhere worth sleeping in does. Skyrim is full of named people, guards, merchants, jarls, innkeepers, hundreds of characters with voices and routines and small details attached to them. But some of the most carefully written people in the game are the ones the main story barely slows down for. Tonight, we spend time with a few of them. Gallus Desidenius was the guild master of the Thieves Guild before the events of Skyrim begin. He was, by all accounts from people who knew him, a careful and capable leader, someone who understood both the practical and the spiritual dimensions of what the guild was connected to. He discovered that Mercer Frey, his second-in-command and close friend, had been stealing from the guild for years. Before he could act on that discovery, Mercer killed him. Gallus died in the Twilight Sepulchre, Nocturnal's sacred temple, and his soul did not pass on the way souls usually do. It stayed there, trapped in the space between the mortal world and Nocturnal's realm, unable to leave, unable to rest. He spent decades in that in-between state. The guild fell apart around the absence he left. Members drifted away. Jobs went wrong. The luck that Nocturnal's pact usually provided dried up slowly, and most members had no idea why. Gallus stayed in the sepulchre through all of it, present, aware, unable to do anything except wait for someone to eventually find out what had happened and come to set things right. That wait lasted a very long time. Kodlak Whitemane knew he was dying. The beast blood had been part of him for decades, and his body was wearing down in the particular way that very old warriors' bodies do, not dramatically, but steadily, the way stone steps wear down under years of footfall. What Kodlak spent his final months focused on was not his health or his legacy in the conventional sense. He wanted his soul free of Hircine's claim. He wanted Sovngarde. The companions who loved him understood this and worked to find a cure. They found the beginning of an answer, a way that the beast blood might be broken and the soul released, but they did not find it in time. Kodlak died in Jorvaska during a silver hand attack in the middle of the day in his own hall. The cure was still being searched for when he went. His final scene in the game is quiet in a way that feels almost unfinished. A man who spent years working towards something specific, who ran out of time just before reaching it. The companions complete the cure for him after his death and send his soul to Sovngarde anyway. It works, but he never knew it would. Calixto Corium runs a small museum in Windhelm called the House of Curiosities. He is friendly in the way that people are friendly when they have decided that friendliness is the most useful presentation. He tells stories about his collection, strange objects from across Tamriel, with the practiced ease of someone who has explained the same things many times before. He seems harmless, eccentric perhaps, but harmless. Windhelm has a serial killer problem during the events of Skyrim, a series of murders targeting women in the city carried out in a specific pattern, leaving a particular kind of mark. The investigation, if the player pursues it, eventually leads to Calixto. The museum is real. The friendliness was real enough in the functional sense, but underneath it was something that used the appearance of ordinary eccentricity as cover for a very long time. Windhelm is already a cold and divided city, full of tension between its Nordic and Dunmer populations, governed by a Jarl whose politics create their own problems. Calixto existed inside all of that difficulty and managed for a while to be the last person anyone suspected. That particular kind of concealment is more unsettling than open threat. It requires patience and a consistent performance across many ordinary interactions. Calixto had both. Sibylla Stentor has been the court mage of solitude for over 100 years. The Blue Palace has seen multiple Jarls come and go during her tenure. Political alignments have shifted, wars have started and ended. The City of Solitude has changed around her in the ways that cities change over a century of continuous habitation. Sibylla has not changed because Sibylla is a vampire. This is not a secret that the game hides from the player particularly hard. Her mannerisms, her appearance, and certain dialogue choices make it fairly clear if you pay attention. What is more interesting is what the game does not explain, whether the court knows. Jarl Elisif and her advisors work alongside this woman every day. They rely on her magical expertise. They presumably notice that she does not age. The game leaves it genuinely ambiguous whether this is a secret carefully maintained or an arrangement that everyone in the court has quietly accepted without ever saying so out loud. Either possibility says something interesting about how solitude works. A city that presents itself as the most civilized and imperial of Skyrim's holds, governed by people who may be sharing their daily administrative work with someone who drinks blood to stay alive. Wurag Groshub does not want to talk to you unless you have something he needs. The Orc librarian of the Arcanium at the College of Winterhold has spent decades acquiring, cataloguing, and preserving books, and his investment in that work is considerably deeper than his investment in most of the people who pass through his library. He is not rude exactly. He is precise about what he cares about and entirely honest that you do not automatically make the list. The books are old. Some of them are irreplaceable. Some of them represent knowledge that exists in no other copy anywhere in Tamriel. Urag understands this with a seriousness that most people reserve for living things. He has watched mages come and go from the college, talented people, interesting people, people who did significant things and then left or died or simply moved on. The books stayed. The books are always there when he comes back to them. There is a particular kind of loyalty that develops between a person and the things that do not leave, and Urag has had long enough to develop it fully. His care for the Arcanium is not a personality quirk. It is a considered position about what deserves protection in a world where most things are temporary. Malborn is a wood elf who works as a servant inside the Thalmor embassy. The dragonborn recruits him during the diplomatic immunity questline to smuggle equipment past the embassy's security. He agrees. The reason he agrees is not ideology or political conviction in any abstract sense. The Thalmor killed his family. That is the whole reason. He did not arrive at his opposition to the Thalmor through careful analysis of their policies or their long-term goals for Tamriel. They killed the people he loved, and he has been looking for ways to work against them from the inside ever since, with the limited tools available to a servant in an embassy. The risk he takes during the questline is enormous. If he is discovered, his death is certain and probably not quick. He knows this and does it anyway. After the questline concludes, his situation becomes significantly more dangerous. The game acknowledges this without resolving it cleanly. Malborn's fate depends on choices the player makes and circumstances that the game does not control tightly. He may survive. He may not. He entered the arrangement with open eyes and the knowledge that grief is a sufficient reason to take a risk that logic alone might not justify. Miraak was the first dragonborn, not the first in the player character's era, the first in recorded history. He existed during the Merethic era, thousands of years before the events of Skyrim, during the period when dragons actively ruled over men. He served the dragons as a priest. He learned the Thuum, and then, at some point, he turned. He used his power as a dragonborn against the dragons who had taught him, killing several of them and absorbing their souls. This happened before the Dragon War that the main game's lore focuses on, before Paarthurnax switched sides, before the ancient Nords had the Thuum as a weapon. Miraak was doing it alone, first, without the network of support that came later. He eventually fled to Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm, where he spent thousands of years preserved in a kind of stasis, accumulating knowledge and waiting. When Alduin raises the dragons again and the new Dragonborn emerges, Miraak becomes aware of it. He begins reaching into the minds of people on Solstheim from across the boundary of Apocrypha, compelling them to build things for reasons they do not understand. The first dragonborn and the current one are inevitably on a collision course, separated by thousands of years of history and the same fundamental nature. Paarthurnax chose the hardest available form of honesty. After turning against Alduin and teaching men the Thu'um during the Dragon War, he did not claim a reward or seek a comfortable position among the people he had helped. He climbed to the top of the throat of the world and stayed there. He meditated. He practiced the way of the voice, the philosophy he helped develop, which holds that the Thu'um should be used for peace and understanding rather than domination. He sat with what he had done before switching sides, all the things he had done in service to Alduin that could not be undone, and he did not run from the weight of it. The greybeards below him knew he was there. Delphine and the Blades knew he was there and wanted him dead for what he had been before he changed. Paarthurnax knew this. He stayed anyway. Centuries of cold and silence and meditation, carrying the full knowledge of his past without trying to minimize it. There is something in that choice that is harder and more deliberate than most acts of heroism. It is not exciting. It is just consistent, day after day, for longer than most things last. Neloth has been alive for a very long time. The Telvanni wizard of Tel Mithrin on Solstheim is estimated to be somewhere above 700 years old, though he does not discuss the specifics with the kind of people he considers worth discussing them with, which is a small group. He has outlived the political system he was born into, several successive political systems, multiple wars, the near destruction of his homeland, and every single person he ever had any kind of relationship with in his early life. He is not sentimental about this. Neloth does not carry visible grief for the people and things he has outlived. He carries curiosity, a sustained, almost mechanical interest in new problems and new phenomena that has kept him functional and engaged across 7 centuries of continuous existence. When the Dragonborn arrives on Solstheim, Neloth is interested in them the way he is interested in anything unusual, as a potential source of information or a useful tool for a current project. His manner is dismissive and self-absorbed and occasionally genuinely funny. What sits underneath that manner, visible occasionally in small moments, is a person who has survived by staying interested in the next thing rather than looking back at the enormous length of everything that came before. 700 years is long enough that looking back too often would probably be the thing that finally broke him. The people in Skyrim who do not get center stage are often the ones the world was hardest on. They carry their histories quietly. They show up for work in cold halls and corrupted cities and isolated towers. They do their jobs. Some of them are waiting for things that are never coming. Some of them are running from things that already happened. All of them are worth a moment of attention before the night gets too quiet to think clearly. Rest now. There are 2 chapters left. Before Skyrim, before Tamriel. Before any map existed or any name was spoken for any place, something happened. A decision was made, or a trick was played, or a sacrifice was offered, depending on which tradition is telling the story. Tonight, we go back to the very beginning of everything. The event that created the mortal world is called the Convention in some texts and referred to by other names in others, but the core of it is consistent across most traditions. It was not a peaceful act of divine generosity. It was closer to a transaction, and like many transactions, the people who agreed to it did not fully understand what they were agreeing to until it was too late to renegotiate. The Atada were the beings who existed before the mortal world. Divine spirits, each one vast and powerful and existing outside of the constraints that define mortal life. No linear time, no physical body, no death, no limitation of the kind that every living creature in Tamriel deals with from birth. They were approached by one of their number who had an idea. The idea was to create something new, a mortal realm, a physical world where smaller beings could live and grow and experience existence in a different way. The pitch was not entirely honest, and the result was not entirely what anyone expected. The being who proposed the creation was Lorcan. He is called different things in different traditions. Shor by the Nords, Sep by the Redguards, the Doom Drum in certain older texts. The details of his nature and his motivation vary significantly depending on who is telling the story. What the various accounts agree on is the basic shape of what he did. He went to the other Etarda and persuaded them to contribute to the creation of a mortal world. The persuasion involved a significant amount of selective information. Some accounts suggest Lorcan genuinely believed the mortal world would be a good thing, an experiment in a new kind of existence. Others suggest he understood the cost clearly and withheld it deliberately. The Etarda who agreed gave up something real. Creating physical reality required divine power as raw material. To build a world, you had to put yourself into it. The ones who agreed to participate did exactly that. They poured portions of their divine nature into the creation, and the world took shape around what they gave. Many of the Etarda who contributed to the creation found when it was finished that they had lost more than they anticipated. The process of building a mortal world required more of them than had been clearly communicated at the start. Some gave so much that they could not fully return to what they had been. They became lesser versions of themselves, still powerful by mortal standards, still divine in the ways that mattered for worship and prayer, but diminished compared to what they had been before the world was built. They had walked into the construction as vast, unconstrained spirits and walked out as something more bounded, more defined, more limited. Some of them accepted this as the cost of what they had made. Others did not accept it quietly. The resentment that some of the Daedric carry toward Lorcan in various texts connects to this moment, the sense that they were not given the full picture before agreeing to something that cost them a permanent portion of what they were. The Etarda who gave the most became the Aedra. This is the group that the 8 divines, Akatosh, Kinnereth, Mara, Dibella, and the others, grew from. They are bound to the mortal world in a way that the Daedra are not. Their contribution to its creation left them connected to it permanently. They cannot fully leave. They cannot fully ignore what happens within it. The fate of the mortal world is tied to them, and they to it in a way that does not apply to beings who kept their distance from the whole project. This is part of why the divines work through signs and dreams and chosen champions rather than acting directly. Their connection to the mortal world is deep, but their ability to intervene in it is constrained by the same rules that govern the world they helped build. They are inside the structure they created. That position has specific limitations that the Daedra who stayed outside do not share. The Daedra are the Etarda who refused. When Lorcan made his proposal and the contributions began, some of the divine spirits looked at the cost and declined. They would not give up any portion of themselves to build a physical world. They stayed whole. They retained the full scope of their divine power without the diminishment that the creation process imposed on those who participated. The consequence of that choice is separation. The Daedra exist in their own realms, the Oblivion planes, parallel to but distinct from the mortal world. They can observe it. They can influence it through champions and artifacts and carefully applied pressure, but they are not bound to it. They did not pay for it, and so they do not have the deep, permanent connection to it that the Aedra carry. Their power is greater in some absolute sense. Their relationship to the world and the people in it is fundamentally more distant. They are watching something they chose not to be part of, and that choice shapes every interaction they have with the mortal world from that point forward. Lorcan did not escape the consequences of what he had started. After the mortal world was built, and the Etarda understood what had been done to them, there was a reckoning. The Aedra, those who had contributed and lost parts of themselves in the process, took action against the one who had proposed the whole arrangement. They destroyed him. Specifically, they tore out his heart. This was not a metaphorical punishment. In the law, Lorcan's heart is a literal object, a physical remnant of a divine being containing an immense concentration of power. The heart was removed and cast away from the rest of him. His body became the moons, Massa and Secunda, the 2 moons visible in Skyrim's night sky. His influence, however, did not end with his destruction. The mortal world he had argued for and helped build continued. The people in it continued to feel something of what he was, even after he was gone. The Nords who call him Shor and place him in Sovngarde as its ruler are, in a sense, honoring someone who was destroyed for creating the world they live in. Lorcan's heart did not disappear after being removed. It fell. through the sky, through the physical world, into the ground of what would eventually become Morrowind. It landed beneath a mountain. That mountain, over time, became Red Mountain, the volcano at the center of Morrowind's geography and its history. The heart of Lorcan sat beneath it for an unspecified but enormous span of time, radiating power into the surrounding land. The Dwemer found it eventually. They built tools to interact with it. A Dunmer named Nerevar and his companions also became entangled with it. The events that followed, the Battle of Red Mountain, the disappearance of the Dwemer, the transformation of the Tribunal, all connect back to that single object sitting underground, too powerful to be safely approached and too significant to be ignored. The most consequential object in all of Tamriel's history is a piece of a god who was destroyed for creating the world. It has been sitting under a volcano this entire time. Magnus was part of the creation but left before it finished. He was the Eteda associated with magic, with the fundamental force of Aetherius that powers all spellwork in the mortal world. At some point during the construction of the mortal world, Magnus decided he wanted out. He tore a hole in the barrier between the mortal world and Aetherius and escaped through it. That hole became the sun. The wound Magnus left in the sky when he fled is what lights the mortal world every day. A permanent gap in the barrier between physical reality and the realm of pure magic, leaking Aetherius energy into the world below. His followers, the Magnagi, also fled after him. They made smaller holes when they left. Those smaller holes became the stars. Every night in Skyrim, the stars visible above the mountains are the exit wounds of divine beings who decided they did not want to be part of the project and left in a hurry. The sky over Tamriel is a record of departures. Some scholars in the Elder Scrolls lore have argued that the mortal world is not a gift. This position appears in various texts and is taken seriously enough in the lore that it cannot be dismissed as fringe thinking. The argument runs roughly like this. The Et'Ada who participated in creation were diminished by it. They gave up divine freedom, divine power, and divine wholeness to build a world where smaller beings would live inside linear time with physical bodies that age and die. The mortal beings who inhabit that world are themselves constrained, born into a limited form, subject to time, unable to access the fullness of existence that the Et'Ada knew before the creation. In this reading, the mortal world is a diminished space built from divine sacrifice that traps everything inside it, mortal and divine alike, in a more limited form of existence than what preceded it. The opposing view holds that limitation is what makes experience meaningful, that a world without endings has no stakes and therefore no genuine feeling. Both positions exist in the texts. The lore does not resolve the argument. It simply presents both and leaves the question open, which may itself be the most honest answer available. The world of Skyrim began with a cost that was not fully agreed to by everyone who paid it. That kind of beginning leaves marks in the relationship between the Aedra and the Daedra, in the power sitting under Red Mountain, in the holes in the sky that used to be something else. The ground you walk on in that world was built from something that was used up to make it. That does not make it less real. It makes it something that deserves to be walked carefully and quietly and with some awareness of what it cost. Sleep gently. One chapter remains. Beneath the city of Riften, past the guards and the market stalls and the smell of the canal, there are tunnels. The Ratway. Narrow, damp and carefully maintained by people who prefer that most of Skyrim not know they are there. The Thieves Guild makes its home down here. And the guild is considerably more complicated than a group of people who have decided that taking other people's things is a reasonable profession. The Ratway is not an accident. Riften was built with corruption running through it the way other cities are built with trade or tradition running through them. The city above has a marketplace, a temple of Mara, a Jarl's court, all the structures of legitimate governance arranged in the correct order. But Riften's actual economy has always been partially controlled by people who operate below that official surface. The Thieves Guild found the city because the city suited them. The guards can be paid. The merchants know which questions not to ask. The Blackbriar family, one of the most powerful in Riften, has maintained a relationship with the guild for long enough that the line between legitimate business and organized theft has become genuinely difficult to locate. The guild operates from the Ragged Flagon, a tavern built into a large cistern below the Ratway, and from that damp and candlelit space it manages contracts across all of Skyrim. It is not a glamorous headquarters, but it is a functional one, and its location beneath a corrupt city in a system of tunnels most people do not know exist is not a weakness. It is the whole point. The guild's luck is not natural. This is the detail that separates the Thieves Guild from an ordinary criminal organization. Every guild master, upon taking the position, participates in a pact with the Daedric Prince Nocturnal. The specifics of what is exchanged vary in how different people describe it, but the core is consistent. The guild master pledges a piece of their soul to Nocturnal in exchange for her favor. Her favor, in practical terms, manifests as the kind of luck that makes dangerous work go more smoothly than probability alone would predict. Jobs that should go wrong do not. Opportunities appear in the right moments. The margin between a successful theft and a catastrophic one narrows in the guild's favor with a consistency that cannot be explained by skill alone. The members who are not in the inner leadership of the guild rarely know this about their organization. They understand they are thieves. They do not necessarily understand that the institution they belong to operates under a divine arrangement and that the arrangement has a cost attached to it that they may not have consented to. The Twilight Sepulchre sits in a remote part of Skyrim, built into the rock, maintained by guardians and by the presence of Nocturnal's influence itself. It is her sacred temple, the physical location where her connection to the mortal world is anchored and stabilized. The skeleton key is the artifact at the center of that anchoring. It is described in the lore as an unbreakable lockpick, which is accurate but incomplete. The skeleton key is also a structural artifact. It maintains the barrier between Nocturnal's realm, the Evergloam, and the mortal world. While the key is in its proper place in the sepulchre, that barrier is stable. Nocturnal's connection to the mortal world remains intact. The pact functions. The guild's luck holds. The key is not a tool that was designed for picking locks. It was designed for maintaining a boundary between two kinds of existence. The fact that it also happens to open anything it touches is almost secondary to its actual purpose, though the guild members who have used it over the years have generally focused on the secondary function. Mercer Frey stole the skeleton key. This is the act that set the events of the Thieves Guild questline in motion, though the full scope of what he had done is not immediately clear when the story begins. Mercer was a nightingale, one of Nocturnal's dedicated mortal servants, which meant he had more direct access to the sepulchre and its contents than almost anyone else in the guild. He took the key and used it for personal enrichment. He broke into vaults, acquired wealth, conducted the kind of theft that the key made trivially easy. What he did not account for, or did not care about, was what removing the key from the sepulchre would do to Nocturnal's connection to the mortal world. The barrier destabilized. Nocturnal's favor, expressed through the luck that the guild depended on, began to dry up. Jobs went wrong. Members were caught or killed. Contracts fell through. The guild that had operated for decades with a particular kind of charmed consistency began to fail in ways that felt both random and cumulative. The members experiencing the failure had no idea what had caused it. The cause was sitting in Mercer's possession, being used to open other people's strongboxes. The Nightingales are the guild's innermost circle, and their arrangement with Nocturnal extends further than the ordinary guildmaster's pact. Where the guildmaster pledges a piece of their soul for luck in life, the Nightingales pledge something larger. They serve Nocturnal in life as her agents and champions, and when they die, that service continues. The souls of Nightingales do not pass on to whatever afterlife their background or beliefs might have directed them toward. They remain at the Twilight Sepulchre, guarding it as spectral wardens for as long as Nocturnal requires. This is presented in the game with a certain gravity. The player character who becomes a Nightingale is committing to something that does not end at death. The afterlife implications are real and permanent. What makes the arrangement interesting, rather than simply grim, is that the Nightingales tend to understand what they are agreeing to. They are not tricked into it. They make the choice knowing the full terms. For people whose lives are already organized around calculated risk and the acceptance of difficult odds, an eternal post-death assignment guarding a Daedric shrine may simply read as the longest contract they have ever signed. The Evergloam is Nocturnal's realm. It exists in permanent twilight, not quite day, not quite night, suspended in the quality of light that exists at dusk when the sun is gone, but the sky has not yet fully darkened. In that realm, shadows are described as having their own kind of presence, not threatening exactly, but active, aware, capable of holding things and passing them along in ways that shadows in the mortal world cannot. Information in the Evergloam functions differently than it does in physical reality. Knowledge that has been hidden, secrets that have been carefully protected, things deliberately kept in the dark, these have particular value and particular weight in a realm built entirely around darkness and concealment. Nocturnal's nature as the Prince of Shadows and Luck is expressed in every aspect of how her realm operates. Spending time there, by the accounts available in the lore, produces a specific kind of disorientation, not fear, but the quiet unease of a place where the rules that govern ordinary experience have been replaced by something that operates on different principles entirely. There is a particular irony in the Thieves Guild's relationship with Nocturnal. The guild exists to take things. Its members spend their professional lives acquiring other people's possessions through methods those people would not consent to if asked. The entire operation is organized around the premise that what belongs to someone else can, under the right circumstances, belong to you instead. And yet the guild has committed itself, at its highest levels, to a Daedric prince who ultimately owns the souls of those highest members. The guild master steals from others and pledges their soul to Nocturnal. The nightingales steal for the guild and pledge their afterlives to the sepulchre. The organization that takes from everyone has, at its core, already been taken from in the most significant way available. They are professional thieves who have been, in a sense, outplayed by a Daedric prince who made the arrangement sound reasonable at the time and has been collecting on it ever since. Nocturnal does not steal. She makes bargains. The outcome is similar. The guild has a code. This surprises people who assume that an organization built on theft operates without ethical constraints. The code is not complicated, but it is real and it is enforced. Do not steal from those who cannot afford to lose what you take. Do not kill unless there is no alternative. Do not betray a fellow guild member for personal gain. Honor the contracts you accept. These rules are not decoration. Members who violate them face consequences from within the guild itself, not from the law, which the guild considers a separate and largely irrelevant system, but from the community of people they work with and depend on. The code exists because the guild understands something practical. An organization that operates without internal trust collapses. The rules that hold it together are self-interested in origin, but the result is a group of people who steal for a living and have nonetheless decided that some things are not acceptable. That position is more considered than it might initially appear. The guild keeps the fire going in the ragged flagon. The contracts keep coming. The tunnels stay maintained and mostly dry. Down there beneath a city that has never been entirely honest about what it is, the work continues in the way that work in old institutions tends to continue. Not because every person involved has examined their choices carefully and found them sound, but because the institution has momentum and the people inside it have built their lives around it. Nocturnal watches from the Evergloam, patient and unhurried. The shadows in Riften are long tonight. Sleep now. There is one chapter left. This is the last chapter. The fire has been burning for a long time tonight, and the world of Skyrim has been breathing quietly around every story we have told. Before we let the silence come in, there is one more thing worth sitting with. Not the gods, not the guilds, not the wars. Tonight we end with the people, the Nords who built this world from cold ground and kept it alive through memory and fire and song. The Thuum is often described as a gift given to specific bloodlines, a power that certain people are born with and others are not. The dragonborn carries it in a concentrated form. The greybeards have cultivated it through decades of disciplined practice. But the oldest Nordic understanding of the voice is broader than any particular lineage. The tradition holds that every living thing has a voice, not a speaking voice in the ordinary sense, something deeper, a fundamental resonance that connects every creature to the language that built the world. The Thuum in this framework is not a special ability granted to the few. It is the natural language of existence, accessible in theory to anything alive, but requiring a level of understanding and discipline that almost nothing achieves in practice. A dragonborn absorbs that language instantly when they encounter a word of power. A greybeard reaches toward it through years of careful, deliberate effort. An ordinary person who has never held a weapon or studied a scroll still carries a version of it, quieter, untrained, present in the way that potential is present in any living thing before it has been called upon. The mountains of Skyrim carry words of power in stone because the ancient priests understood this. They were not creating something new. They were preserving something that had always been there, waiting for someone with the right nature to recognize it. Ysgramor's name is spoken with reverence throughout Skyrim. His statue stands in Whiterun. His axe hangs in Jorvaskr. The 500 companions are invoked as the founding moment of Nordic warrior culture on this continent. The stories told about him are stories of grief transformed into purpose. A man who lost his sons, who watched the first human city in Skyrim burn, who crossed a frozen sea and came back with everything he had to offer. That version of Ysgramor is real. The campaign he led was real. The courage required to sail back towards something that had already destroyed so much of what he loved was real. What is also real is what that campaign produced for the Snow Elves. The people who were driven from their land by Ysgramor's return ended up underground, serving the Dwemer, being slowly blinded across generations, eventually becoming the Falmer. The creature you encounter in Dwemer ruins, pale, hunched, savage, bearing almost no resemblance to the civilization that preceded it, is the end result of a chain of events that Ysgramor set in motion. Both things are true simultaneously. He was a grieving father who led his people home. He was also the beginning of one of the longest and most complete destructions of a culture that the lore records. History in Skyrim does not resolve that tension. It holds both versions and asks you to carry them together. The 500 companions who sailed with Ysgramor did not remain as a single unified group forever. After the campaign to reclaim Skyrim concluded, after the Snow Elves had been driven out and the land had been claimed, the warriors dispersed. Some stayed in Skyrim and built holds and families and traditions. Others left, traveling south and east and west across Tamriel, carrying the warrior culture of the companions with them into every corner of the continent. The descendants of those 500 warriors spread so widely that their influence became difficult to trace to a single source. Nordic warrior traditions show up in places that seem far removed from the frozen north, in fighting styles, in codes of honor, in the specific way that certain groups understand loyalty between people who choose to stand together. The companions in Whiterun are the most direct institutional heir to what Ysgramor built. But the wider inheritance is distributed across a much larger geography, carried in the bodies and habits of people who may not know exactly where those habits came from or how far the root system extends beneath their feet. The mead halls of Skyrim are loud places. Any traveller who has spent a night in Whiterun's Bannered Mare or Solitude's Winking Skeever knows the particular quality of that noise. Voices competing with each other across wooden tables, someone attempting a song in a corner, the sound of cups meeting other cups in toasts that vary from heartfelt to purely habitual. That noise is easy to read as simple celebration. People drinking because drinking is pleasant and the night is cold and there is not much else to do. But the Nordic tradition behind the mead hall runs deeper than leisure. The toasts are specific. They name the dead. They name battles. They name the particular cold morning when a particular group of people did something that deserved to be remembered. The drinking is the vehicle for the remembrance, not the other way around. A Nordic toast is a small act of historical preservation, a way of keeping a name or a moment alive by speaking it aloud in a warm room full of witnesses. The mead hall is where the past stays present. The noise is not just people being loud, it is people refusing to let things be forgotten. At the center of every mead hall in Skyrim, there is a fire. This is not a decorative choice, or simply a practical heating solution, though it serves that purpose too. The fire in a Nordic mead hall carries symbolic meaning that goes back further than most of the buildings that currently contain it. The tradition holds that the hall fire must not go out. Allowing it to die is not simply inconvenient. It represents something about the community itself failing to maintain what it is supposed to maintain. Through the long winters that Skyrim produces, when travel becomes dangerous and food stores are finite and the cold presses in from every direction, the fire in the mead hall is what people move toward. It is the physical center of survival and community simultaneously. Keeping it burning is a collective responsibility shared among everyone who benefits from it. The fire does not belong to the Jarl or the innkeeper. It belongs to everyone in the hall. That shared ownership of something that has to be tended constantly, that requires attention and contribution to remain alive, is a reasonable description of how Nordic communities understood themselves at their best, as something that exists only as long as everyone keeps showing up to maintain it. The bards of Skyrim are easy to underestimate. They sit in corners of taverns and play the same songs to rooms full of people who are paying more attention to their drinks than to the music. The Bard's College in Solitude trains them formally, but even trained bards often end up in positions that do not look prestigious from the outside. They are service workers in a world that has more obviously powerful occupations. The older understanding of what a bard was, however, is different from what they appear to be in the current era of the game. In the earlier periods of Nordic culture, before written records existed in any reliable form, the bard was the historian. They were the person responsible for knowing what had happened and keeping that knowledge alive through performance. A battle that was not sung about would be forgotten. A warrior who died without a song written for them might as well not have existed, because nothing would carry their name forward into the future. The bard's job was to prevent that from happening, to be the living library of a culture that did not yet have another way to store what it needed to remember. What remains of that function in Skyrim's current bardic tradition is thinner than what it used to be, but it has not disappeared entirely. The songs in the mead halls still name the old battles. The bards who play them are still, in a diminished way, doing what bards have always done. The ancient Nords did not write things down. For most of the early period of Nordic history, the Merethic era, the early First era, there was no written Nordic language in common use. This is not because the Nords were less sophisticated than other cultures. It is because they had made a different choice about how knowledge should be stored and transmitted. Knowledge that lives in writing is fixed. It can be copied accurately, but it is also vulnerable. Burn the library and the knowledge burns with it. Knowledge that lives in people, in performance, in the practiced memory of trained specialists is harder to destroy. You cannot burn a song the way you can burn a book, as long as someone who knows the song is still alive. The Nords chose that system. The bards, the storytellers, the elders who gathered young people around fires and recited the genealogies and the battle histories, these were the archives. The words of power carved into stone at word walls were a partial exception, a specific kind of knowledge considered important enough to commit to a more permanent medium. But the bulk of what the early Nords knew about themselves and their history lived in mouths and memories, passed from one generation to the next through performance rather than inscription. When that chain broke, when a tradition ended or a generation was lost, the knowledge it carried went with it. Some of what the ancient Nords knew is simply gone. Not hidden in an undiscovered ruin. Gone because the last person who carried it did not pass it on in time. Atmora is a continent to the north of Tamriel. It is where the Nords came from, the original homeland of the human race that would eventually cross the sea, settle Skyrim, and become the people whose culture fills every corner of the game. In the current era of the Elder Scrolls, Atmora is almost entirely uninhabitable. The continent froze. Not all at once. Over a long span of time, the climate changed and the cold deepened until the land could no longer sustain the populations that had once lived there. The few accounts of Atmora that exist from travelers who went there after the migration describe a frozen expanse with ruins of cities partially preserved under ice. Structures that were clearly once significant, now standing empty in a cold that no one currently lives in. The history of those cities, the full record of what Nordic civilization looked like before it came to Skyrim, is mostly lost. The ice preserved the structures, but not the knowledge inside them. What the Nords of Skyrim know about Atmora is fragmentary. Stories passed down, references in old texts, the vague cultural memory of a place that exists in identity more than in accessible reality. They know they came from somewhere cold and far away. Most of them have never seen it, and at this point could not survive it if they tried. The oldest texts in the Elder Scrolls that refer to Skyrim as a place do not call it a kingdom. They do not call it a territory or a province or a political entity of any kind. They call it home. That word, home, appears in early Nordic references to this land with a consistency that suggests it was not a casual description. It was the specific, considered word that the people who settled here reached for when they tried to explain what the place meant to them. Not the land we govern, not the territory we hold. Home. A word that carries warmth and permanence and the specific kind of belonging that does not require justification. You do not explain why a place is home. It simply is. The Nords who crossed the sea from Atmora, who fought the snow elves, who buried their dead in stone tombs under the mountains and built their mead halls around fires that were never supposed to go out. They did all of that in a place they had decided was home before they had finished deciding anything else about it. That feeling has never fully left the land. It is in the way the light falls across the tundra near Whiterun at the end of the day. It is in the warmth that reaches you when you step into a mead hall from the cold. It is in the fire at the center of the room that someone made sure to keep burning. Skyrim is not a story that ends. It is a place that waits, patient and quiet, the way home always does. The fire is low now. The stories have all been told. The gods and the dragons, the vanished Dwemer and the fallen snow elves, the companions and the thieves and the scholars and the dead. All of it is part of the same world. A world built from sacrifice and shaped by choices made a very long time ago by people and beings who could not fully predict what they were building. You have been part of that world tonight, walking through it quietly, listening. And now the world is still. The mountains are dark. The mead halls have gone quiet. The fires are banked low enough to last until morning. Somewhere above the clouds, the stars, those small wounds in the sky left by departing gods, are still shining. Skyrim is still breathing. It will be there when you wake up. It will be there long after that. Rest now. You have earned it. Sleep well, traveler. The road will still be there in the morning.